there, my dreamy travelers. Tonight, we step into a mirror world where familiar faces transform and roles reverse, yet the heart's truth remains unchanged. A story of Beau Swan, who leaves the Arizona sun for Washington's endless rain and finds something impossible waiting in the shadows. Here, in the space between ordinary and extraordinary, between breathing and eternal stillness, between one heartbeat and forever, a dangerous love awaits. So, before you settle in, please support us and subscribe to the channel so we can keep creating these stories for you. Well, now it's time. Get yourself settled in. Close your eyes. Breathe in very slow. And let the gentle darkness embrace you. And drift into this reimagined journey where everything changes, yet love remains constant. Welcome to Life and Death, where danger wears a beautiful face and dreams never fade. Beau Swan woke on his last morning in Phoenix to the sound of his mother humming in the kitchen, a sound that had become increasingly rare over the past few months. He lay still in his bed, staring at the ceiling fan rotating slowly overhead, and tried to understand how he'd arrived at this moment. The decision to move to Forks, Washington had been his own, made gradually over the course of his junior year as he'd watched his mother's relationship with Phil become increasingly serious and increasingly complicated by Beau's presence. Renee loved Phil. That much was obvious in the way she lit up when the minor league baseball player called, in the way she planned her days around his game schedule, in the way she talked about following him from city to city as his career demanded. But she wouldn't do it, wouldn't fully commit to that nomadic baseball wife existence because of Beau, because her 17-year-old son needed stability, needed to finish high school in one place, needed a parent who was present rather than constantly traveling. So Beau had made the choice for her. He'd called his father Charlie in Forks and suggested spending his senior year there, living in the small Washington town he'd visited only briefly during childhood summers. Charlie had agreed with an enthusiasm that made Beau feel guilty for not suggesting it sooner, and Renee had protested with a transparency that revealed her relief underneath the maternal concern. Now, with his bags packed and his flight leaving in 3 hours, Beau felt the weight of the decision settling over him like the Phoenix heat that already pressed against the windows despite the early hour. He was leaving sunshine and desert and everything familiar. He was going to a place where the sky stayed grey, where rain fell more days than not, where he knew almost no one except a father he barely remembered. But his mother would be happy. She would follow Phil from Phoenix to Jacksonville, to Portland, to wherever the team sent him, and she would do it without guilt or worry, because Beau was safe with Charlie. That knowledge made the sacrifice bearable, even necessary. Beau rose from bed and began his final preparations, moving through the house that had been home for as long as he could remember. The rooms felt small already, as if his decision to leave had diminished them. His reflection in the bathroom mirror showed the same face he'd always had. Tall and lean and pale, even after 17 years under the Arizona sun, with dark hair that never quite cooperated, and eyes that matched his mother's brown. Nothing about his appearance suggested he was capable of the kind of selflessness he was attempting. But then again, it wasn't really selflessness. It was practicality. His mother needed to live her life, and he was old enough to step aside and let her. The goodbye at the airport was teary on Renee's part, stoic on Beau's. She hugged him too tightly and too long, making promises about visiting that they both knew would be difficult to keep with Phil's schedule. She told him he could change his mind, could come back any time, that she'd make it work somehow. But they both understood the truth. This separation was necessary, and necessary things didn't require happiness to be right. The flight north took 3 hours, during which Beau watched the landscape below transform from desert to farmland to forest. The evergreens appeared first as scattered dark patches, then as dense carpets that covered the hills completely, unbroken except for the occasional road or river cutting through the green. It looked claustrophobic from above, that endless forest pressing in from all sides, and Beau felt his chest tighten slightly as the plane began its descent into Seattle. Charlie met him at baggage claim, looking exactly as Beau remembered from his last visit 3 years ago. Tall, like Beau, with the same dark hair now threaded with grey, wearing his police uniform because he'd come directly from work. They greeted each other with the awkward affection of people who loved each other but didn't quite know how to show it. A quick hug and a handshake combined into something that satisfied neither impulse completely. The drive from Seattle to Forks took nearly 4 hours, winding through increasingly dense forest and increasingly small towns. Charlie filled the silence with updates about Forks, about his job as police chief, about the truck he'd bought for Beau from his friend Billy Black down at the reservation. The truck was old, a 1963 Chevy that Billy's son had fixed up before leaving for college, but it ran well and would handle the wet roads better than anything newer. Charlie seemed particularly proud of this purchase, describing the engine work and the new tires with more enthusiasm than Beau had heard from him about anything else. Beau listened and nodded and watched the trees press closer to the highway. The sky above was grey, exactly the colour he'd expected, and the air that came through the truck's vents smelled of wet earth and pine and something green he couldn't quite identify. It was the smell of too much moisture, of things growing in abundance, of a place where the sun appeared only rarely and rain fell almost constantly. The temperature had dropped significantly as they'd driven north, the phoenix heat of the morning replaced by a dampness that seemed to seep through the truck's windows. Beau had brought a jacket, but he suspected it wouldn't be enough for a Washington winter. Charlie noticed him shivering slightly and turned up the heat, explaining that the rain would start soon, probably within the hour, and wouldn't stop for days once it began. This casual acceptance of perpetual precipitation made Beau feel even more disconnected from this place, as if he'd moved not just to a different state, but to a different world entirely. Forks itself was smaller than Beau had remembered, barely more than a few streets of houses and businesses pressed between the forest and the Kalawa River. The population sign as they entered proclaimed 3,220 residents, which seemed optimistic. Main Street consisted of a few small stores, a diner, a hardware shop, and the police station where Charlie worked. Everything looked grey and wet even though the rain hadn't started yet, as if the moisture in the air was enough to dampen surfaces without actually falling. Charlie's house sat on the outskirts of town, a small 2-story structure painted white with a wooden porch that needed repair. The yard was mostly moss and ferns, the grass too waterlogged to grow properly. A basketball hoop stood at the edge of the driveway, the net rotted away from years of rain and neglect. Beau remembered playing there during one summer visit when he was 10, missing more shots than he made even then. Inside, everything was exactly as it had been during Beau's childhood visits. The same worn furniture, the same outdated kitchen appliances, the same photographs on the walls showing Beau at various ages during those brief summer stays. The living room had a television that looked decades old and a recliner positioned directly in front of it where Charlie clearly spent most of his time. The house smelled faintly of coffee and wood smoke, comfortable scents that suggested bachelor living without complete neglect. His room upstairs had been updated slightly, Charlie explained, with a new desk and a better mattress, but otherwise it remained frozen in time, waiting for an occupant who'd never arrived. The walls were still the same pale blue they'd been painted when Beau was 8. The bookshelf still held the same collection of adventure novels he'd read during those summer visits. Even the bedspread was familiar, a plaid pattern in blues and greens that matched nothing else in the room. Beau unpacked his minimal belongings while Charlie heated up dinner, the process taking less than an hour because he deliberately brought little with him. Clothes, books, his laptop, a few photographs of Renee. Everything else felt unnecessary, the accumulation of a life he was leaving behind. When he finished, he stood at his bedroom window and looked out at the forest that began just beyond the backyard, the trees disappearing into grey mist that made distances impossible to judge. The view was beautiful in a melancholy way. All those shades of green layered upon each other, the branches heavy with moisture even before the rain began. Birds he couldn't identify called from the depths of the forest, their voices strange and foreign compared to the desert birds he'd grown up hearing. Everything here felt older somehow, more permanent, as if the forest had been here long before humans arrived and would remain long after they left. This was home now, this grey, wet, claustrophobic place where everyone would know him as Charlie Swan's son, where his clumsiness would be even more pronounced on rain-slick surfaces, where the sun appeared so rarely that people celebrated when it did. The thought should have been depressing, but instead Beau felt only a strange numbness, an acceptance that this was simply how things were now. He descended the stairs to join Charlie for dinner, and they ate in comfortable silence, broken only by the sound of rain beginning against the windows. It was a gentle rain, steady and soft, the kind that could last for days without varying in intensity. Charlie had made fried fish and coleslaw, simple food prepared competently, and they ate while the local news played on the television with the volume turned low. After dinner, Charlie showed Beau the truck in the driveway, clearly excited about the gift. The Chevy was massive, painted a faded red that had probably been vibrant once, with a rounded body style that marked it as distinctly vintage. The engine, when Charlie started it, sounded loud and powerful, rumbling in a way that would announce Beau's arrival anywhere he went. Charlie explained the quirks, the way the steering pulled slightly left, the way the brakes needed firm pressure, the way the heater took forever to warm up but then worked perfectly. Beau tried to show appropriate gratitude, though he felt overwhelmed by the responsibility of maintaining such an old vehicle. Charlie seemed to understand his hesitation and assured him that Billy's son had done excellent work on the engine, that the truck was actually more reliable than it looked. The keys were in the ignition, Charlie said, and Beau could drive it to school in the morning. Forks High School was small, only 350 students total, so Beau wouldn't have trouble finding his classes. Back inside, Charlie gave Beau the brief tour of the rest of the house. The kitchen was stocked with basics, though Charlie admitted he ate at the diner more often than not. The bathroom had been updated recently with new fixtures, the one concession to modernity in an otherwise dated house. Charlie's own room was at the end of the hall upstairs, and he made it clear that Beau had privacy and independence, that he trusted him to make his own decisions about curfews and responsibilities. That night, lying in the unfamiliar bed, listening to the rain continue its soft percussion against the roof, Beau thought about his mother in Phoenix. She would be packing already, preparing to join Phil in Jacksonville for spring training. She would be happy, free in a way she hadn't been for years, and that happiness was worth this sacrifice, worth the grey skies and the rain and the loneliness of being the perpetual outsider in a town where everyone else had known each other since birth. Beau closed his eyes and tried to sleep, but rest came slowly in the darkness that felt more complete here than it ever had in Phoenix, where city lights always provided some ambient glow. Here, the darkness was total, broken only by the occasional flash of lightning in the distance, and the silence between raindrops seemed to press against his ears with physical weight. Tomorrow, he would start at Forks High School. Tomorrow, he would attempt to navigate a new social structure, new teachers, new expectations. Tomorrow, his senior year would officially begin in a place where he knew no one except his father, where his presence would be a curiosity simply because he was new. The rain intensified slightly, drumming harder against the roof and windows, and Beau found the sound oddly comforting despite its strangeness. It was constant, reliable, something he could count on in this place where everything else felt uncertain. He thought about the truck waiting in the driveway, about the school he'd see in the morning, about the life he was building from nothing in this small, wet town at the edge of the world. But tonight, he had only the rain and the darkness and the strange comfort of knowing his mother was happy. It would have to be enough. And as sleep finally began to pull him under, Beau wondered what waited for him in Forks, what this final year of high school would bring, whether he'd find anything in this grey place worth the sacrifice he'd made. The rain continued its gentle song against the windows, and Beau drifted into dreams where everything was still possible, where tomorrow hadn't yet arrived to prove what his new life would actually be. Beau woke to the sound of rain and the realization that this was no longer a temporary visit, but his actual life. The grey light filtering through his window suggested morning, though the darkness made it impossible to tell what time it actually was. His alarm clock showed 6:30, early enough to shower and eat breakfast before the drive to school. Charlie had already left for work, his police cruiser gone from the driveway, a note on the kitchen counter explaining that cereal was in the cupboard and milk in the fridge. Bo ate standing up, too nervous to sit, and tried not to think about the day ahead. First days were always difficult, but first days in a new school during senior year felt particularly cruel. Everyone else had established friend groups, established routines, established identities. He would be the curiosity, the outsider, the police chief's son, who'd moved from Arizona for reasons people would speculate about endlessly. The truck started with his characteristic rumble, loud enough to wake anyone still sleeping on the street. Bo drove slowly, familiarizing himself with the vehicle's quirks, the way it handled the wet roads, the way the windshield wipers struggled to keep up with the steady rain. Forks High School appeared after only a few minutes of driving, a collection of low brick buildings that looked more like a prison than an educational institution. The parking lot was already half full, despite the early hour. Students arriving in pickups and sedans, everyone moving quickly through the rain toward the shelter of the buildings. Bo parked the truck in the back row and sat for a moment, gathering courage. Through the rain-streaked windshield, he could see groups of students greeting each other, laughing, sharing the easy comfort of long familiarity. No one looked his direction. No one noticed the enormous red Chevy that announced his presence like a foghorn. He was invisible still, and he savored that invisibility for one more moment before stepping out into the rain. The office was warm and brightly lit, a stark contrast to the grey world outside. The secretary, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and greying hair, greeted him with immediate recognition. "Bo Swan," she said, "Charlie's boy, here for his schedule and locker assignment." She had everything prepared, his class schedule printed neatly, a map of the campus with his classrooms marked, a slip for each of his teachers to sign confirming his attendance. She explained the layout of the school with practiced efficiency, pointing out the cafeteria, the gym, the library, all the essential landmarks he'd need to navigate his new life. His first class was English, held in Building 3. Bo found it easily enough, arriving early enough to choose a seat in the back corner where he might escape notice. But the other students filed in with curious glances, whispering to each other, clearly aware of the new arrival. The teacher, Mr. Mason, introduced Bo to the class with embarrassing enthusiasm, making him stand and tell everyone where he was from and why he'd moved. Bo kept his explanation brief. Phoenix, living with his dad now, senior year. The students nodded politely and lost interest almost immediately, returning to their conversations. By third period, Bo had been approached by several students who introduced themselves with varying degrees of friendliness. There was Jeremy, tall and gangly with an eager smile, who offered to show Bo around campus. Alan, quiet and thoughtful, who shared Bo's English class and trigonometry, and Michaela, who appeared at Bo's locker between classes with a confidence that suggested she'd appointed herself his official guide. Michaela was pretty in a conventional way, with blonde hair and blue eyes, and a smile that showed too many teeth. She talked constantly, filling Bo in on essential school gossip, pointing out which teachers were strict and which were lenient, explaining the complex social hierarchies that governed Forks High School. Bo listened with half his attention, nodding in appropriate places, while his mind wandered to thoughts of Phoenix and sunshine, and his mother probably already on a plane to Jacksonville. Lunch arrived with a relief that surprised him. 4 classes completed meant he was more than halfway through this first day. The cafeteria was small, crowded with students who'd apparently abandoned any attempt to go outside in the rain. Michaela claimed him immediately, steering him to a table where Jeremy and Alan and several others already sat. They made space for him with welcoming smiles, and Beau felt a surge of gratitude for their easy acceptance, even as he recognized it for what it was. Curiosity more than genuine friendship, at least for now. The conversation at the table flowed around him. Discussion of weekend plans and homework assignments, and who was dating whom. Beau contributed little, content to observe, to learn the dynamics of this new social world. And then Michaela said something that made him look up from his pizza, made his attention sharpen and focus completely. "Don't stare," she said quietly, her eyes cutting toward the cafeteria entrance. "But that's the Cullens." Beau looked. 5 students entered together, moving with a grace that seemed choreographed despite its naturalness. They were beautiful, all of them. Beautiful in a way that transcended normal teenage attractiveness and became something almost alien. The tallest was a boy, broad-shouldered and blonde, with a movie star face that belonged on magazine covers. Next to him walked a girl with the same blonde hair and the same perfect features, clearly related, possibly twins. Behind them came another boy, tall and lean with honey-colored hair, and beside him a tiny girl with short black hair styled in precise spikes. And then there was the 5th member of their group, and Beau felt his breath catch in his throat. She was smaller than the others, more slender, with pale skin that seemed to glow against her dark hair. Her features were delicate, refined, arranged with a symmetry that human faces rarely achieved. She moved with fluid grace, her body shifting through space as if gravity affected her differently than it affected everyone else. And even from across the cafeteria, even through the crowd of students between them, Beau could see that her eyes were a strange golden color, almost amber, catching the fluorescent light like a cat's eyes might. "They're Dr. Cullen's family," Michaela continued in a whisper, clearly enjoying her role as informant. "The blonde twins are Royal and Eleanor. The dark-haired girl is Edith, and the other 2 are Jessamine and Archie. They all live with Dr. Cullen and his wife, kind of like foster kids, except some of them are related to each other." Beau watched the Cullens move to a table in the far corner, away from everyone else. They sat with perfect posture, not touching their food trays, talking quietly among themselves. The rest of the cafeteria seemed to fade into background noise, becoming less real than these 5 impossibly beautiful people who clearly existed in a world separate from everyone around them. "Which ones are related?" Beau asked, his voice sounding strange to his own ears. "Royal and Jessamine are twins, I think, and Eleanor and Archie are together, like dating, which is weird since they live in the same house, but they're not actually related, so I guess it's okay." Michaela paused, following Beau's gaze. "Edith doesn't date anyone. Lots of guys have tried, but she's not interested. She's kind of intimidating anyway. They all are." Beau couldn't stop staring, and he knew it was rude, knew he should look away. But something about Edith Cullen held his attention completely. She sat slightly apart from the others, her golden eyes scanning the cafeteria with what looked like boredom, And then, as if feeling his stare, her eyes met his directly. The impact was physical, like a shock running through his body. Her expression didn't change, but something in her gaze sharpened, focused on him with an intensity that made his heart rate accelerate. For 3 seconds, maybe 4, they stared at each other across the crowded cafeteria. And then Aditi looked away, turning her attention back to her family, and Bo felt the absence of her gaze like a loss. "They're all really smart too," Michaela continued, apparently unaware of what had just happened. "Like genius level. They're all in advanced classes, even though some of them are only juniors. Dr. Cullen's young too, like 30 or something. And his wife looks even younger. The whole family is kind of strange, but they keep to themselves mostly." The lunch period ended, and the Cullens rose as one unit and glided toward the exit. Edith moved past Bo's table without looking at him, but he caught her scent, something floral and sweet that seemed out of place in the cafeteria's atmosphere of grease and processed food. And then they were gone, and the cafeteria seemed dimmer somehow, more ordinary, less interesting. Biology class was in Building 6. Bo found it easily enough, arriving with several minutes to spare. The classroom was typical. Black-topped lab tables arranged in pairs, the familiar smell of chemicals and preservatives hanging in the air. Students filed in, taking seats with clear preference for certain lab partners. And then Bo saw that only one seat remained empty, next to Edith Cullen. He approached slowly, aware of every eye in the classroom tracking his movement. Edith sat rigidly at the lab table, her body angled slightly away from the empty seat, her hands gripping the table edge with white-knuckled intensity. She didn't look at him as he sat down, didn't acknowledge his presence in any way, but Bo felt her tension like heat radiating from her body. The teacher, Mr. Banner, called the class to attention and began explaining their current unit on cellular anatomy. Bo tried to focus on the lecture, tried to take notes, tried to ignore the girl sitting 18 inches away who seemed to be barely controlling some powerful emotion. But it was impossible. He could feel her rigid stillness, could sense her absolute refusal to look in his direction, could see from his peripheral vision how her chest rose and fell with breathing that seemed too deliberate, too controlled. And then he caught her expression as she turned slightly, adjusting her position to face even further away from him. Her face showed disgust, clear and undeniable, her features twisted with revulsion as if his presence physically pained her. Her hand on the table edge gripped so tightly that her fingers had gone completely white, the tension in her arm suggesting she was using all her strength to hold herself in her seat. Bo felt heat rush to his face, embarrassment flooding through him. He tried to shift away, to give her more space, wondering desperately what he'd done to provoke such a reaction. Did he smell? Was his deodorant not working? Had he offended her somehow without realizing it? The hour that followed was the longest of his life, sitting next to someone who clearly wished he didn't exist, who found his mere presence unbearable. When the bell finally rang, Edith was out of her seat and through the door before Bo had even closed his notebook. He sat for a moment, staring at the empty seat beside him, feeling the rejection like a physical blow. Around him, other students gathered their things and filed out, a few shooting him curious glances, but no one saying anything. The rest of the day passed in a blur. Bo moved through his remaining classes mechanically, his mind replaying that hour in biology, trying to understand what had happened. At the final bell, he returned to the office to have his teachers sign his attendance slip, and while waiting for the secretary to process his paperwork, he saw Edith Cullen at the counter. She was talking to the secretary in a low, urgent voice, asking about switching to a different biology section. There wasn't another section, the secretary explained patiently. The other biology class was full. Edith's jaw tightened, and for a moment Bo thought she might argue further. But then she seemed to sense his presence, her body going still in that same unnatural way it had in class. Without looking at him, without another word, she turned and left the office. Bo drove home through the rain, his mind churning with confusion and hurt pride. The first day had gone well enough, he supposed. He'd met friendly people, navigated the campus successfully, survived all his classes. But the encounter with Edith Cullen overshadowed everything else, a dark note in an otherwise acceptable day. She hated him. For no reason he could discern, she found him absolutely repulsive. And the worst part was that he couldn't stop thinking about her, couldn't stop seeing those strange golden eyes filled with disgust, couldn't stop wondering what he'd done to deserve such immediate and intense rejection. Charlie asked about his day over dinner, and Bo gave the expected answers. Fine. The classes seemed okay. The other students were friendly. He didn't mention Edith Cullen or the way she'd looked at him like he was something rotten. That humiliation felt too private to share, even with his father. That night, lying in bed listening to the rain, Bo tried to forget about the beautiful, strange girl who hated him. But her face appeared every time he closed his eyes. Her expression of revulsion burned into his memory like a brand. Tomorrow, he'd have biology again. Tomorrow, he'd have to sit next to her for another hour. Tomorrow, he'd have to endure that same rigid rejection. But tonight, he had only the confusion and the hurt and the strange, inexplicable pull he felt towards someone who clearly wanted nothing to do with him. It made no sense. None of it made any sense. And his sleep finally claimed him. Bo's last thought was of golden eyes filled with something that looked like hatred, but felt impossibly like something else entirely. Edith Cullen was absent from school for the next week, and Bo told himself he was relieved by her absence, even as he found himself looking for her in the cafeteria every lunch period, even as he felt a strange disappointment each time he entered biology to find her seat empty. The rational part of his mind insisted this was better, that sitting next to an empty chair was infinitely preferable to sitting next to someone who looked at him with such visceral disgust. But some other part of him, some part he didn't want to examine too closely, felt her absence as a loss. The week passed in a routine that should have been comfortable. Jeremy and Michaela and Alan absorbed him into their social circle, with the easy acceptance of small-town kids who'd known each other too long and welcomed fresh blood. They ate lunch together, studied together in the library, made plans for weekend activities that Bo agreed to without enthusiasm. They were kind, these new friends, and Bo appreciated their efforts, even as he recognized his own emotional distance from their concerns. Michaela's interest in him was obvious, her touches lingering a moment too long, her laughter too bright at his mild jokes. Bo tried to be oblivious, tried not to encourage what he couldn't reciprocate, but he suspected his attempts at discouragement were too subtle. Jeremy noticed, making quiet comments about Michaela's crush, asking with careful casualness if Beau was interested. Beau deflected, claiming he wasn't looking for a relationship, which was true enough, even if it didn't address the real issue. He simply didn't feel that spark with Michaela, that pull of genuine attraction. The rain continued without pause, transforming the world into various shades of grey and green. Beau learned to navigate the wet parking lot without slipping, learned which buildings had the shortest routes between classes, learned to dress in layers that could be adjusted throughout the day as the inadequate heating systems fluctuated between too cold and too warm. Forks was becoming familiar, if not yet home, and Beau settled into his new life with the resignation of someone who'd accepted that this was simply how things were now. And then, on Monday of the second week, Edith Cullen returned. Beau saw her in the parking lot that morning, climbing gracefully from a silver Volvo, driven by the boy Michaela had identified as Royal. She moved with that same fluid grace he remembered, but something was different. Even from a distance, even through the rain, Beau could see that her eyes had changed colour. The black he remembered from that first day had transformed to a strange golden amber, bright and almost luminous in the grey morning light. His heart rate accelerated involuntarily, a physical response he couldn't control or explain. She was just a girl, a beautiful, strange girl who'd made her dislike of him abundantly clear, but still just a girl. There was no reason for his pulse to quicken, no reason for his palms to sweat slightly as he gathered his books and headed toward his first class. Biology arrived with its usual sense of impending dread. Beau entered the classroom and moved toward his seat, steeling himself for another hour of rigid silence and palpable tension. But when he sat down, when Edith turned towards him with a smile that transformed her already beautiful face into something almost painful to look at, Beau felt his carefully constructed defenses crumble completely. "Hello," she said, her voice like music, melodic and clear. "I'm Edith Cullen. I didn't get a chance to introduce myself last week. You're Beau Swan, right?" Beau stared at her, unable to reconcile this friendly, smiling girl with the one who'd gripped the table edge like she was fighting not to flee from his presence. "Yes," he managed, his voice sounding rough compared to hers. "I'm Beau. It's nice to meet you." Her smile widened, genuine warmth in her expression, and Beau felt himself responding despite his confusion, despite every logical reason to be wary of this sudden personality transformation. The class period that followed was entirely different from the first. Edith talked to him, asked him questions about Phoenix and his mother and why he'd moved to Forks. Her questions felt too personal for someone he'd just met, too probing, as if she was trying to gather as much information as possible in the limited time available. But her attention was flattering, intoxicating even, and Beau found himself answering more honestly than he'd intended. She laughed at his description of his mother's scattered personality, a sound like wind chimes that made several students turn to look. She asked about his interests, his hobbies, what he did for fun in Phoenix. When Beau mentioned that he mostly read, that he wasn't particularly athletic or social, she seemed genuinely interested rather than judgmental. Her focus on him was complete, as if nothing else in the classroom existed. as if his answers mattered more than anything else. Mr. Banner's lecture faded into background noise. Bo was aware of taking notes, of copying the diagrams from the board, but his real attention was on the girl beside him, on the strange electricity that seemed to crackle in the space between them. Several times their hands nearly touched, reaching for the same textbook or adjusting papers on the desk, and each time Bo felt a shock of awareness that made his breath catch. When the bell rang, Edith gathered her things with the same fluid grace, but without the desperate haste of their first meeting. "I'll see you tomorrow, Bo," she said, her golden eyes meeting his directly, and Bo felt pinned by that gaze, unable to look away until she released him by turning toward the door. The rest of the day felt anticlimactic after that hour. Bo moved through his remaining classes in the days, replaying every word of their conversation, trying to understand what had changed. At lunch, Michaela noticed his distraction and asked if something was wrong. Bo deflected, claiming tiredness, but he could feel her watching him with suspicion. That night, lying in bed, Bo tried to make sense of Edith Cullen's transformation. The hostile girl from the first day and the friendly, charming girl from today couldn't be the same person, yet they clearly were. What had changed? Where had she been for a week? And why did her sudden interest feel both thrilling and somehow dangerous, as if he was being drawn into something he didn't fully understand? The following weeks fell into a pattern that consumed Bo's thoughts more completely than he wanted to admit. Biology became the center of his day, the class he looked forward to with an anticipation that felt disproportionate to a 50-minute period sitting in a classroom. Edith talked to him every day, asked him endless questions, seemed genuinely interested in every mundane detail of his life. But she never volunteered information about herself, deflecting his questions with humor or changing the subject so smoothly that Bo often didn't realize she'd avoided answering until much later. He noticed other things too. She never ate, though she bought lunch every day in the cafeteria. Her skin was ice cold when their hands accidentally touched. She moved with impossible grace, never stumbling or making awkward movements like normal people did. Her eyes changed color, sometimes bright gold, sometimes darker, almost black, though never the human brown or blue or green. And she had a way of appearing suddenly, materializing at his side in the hallway or parking lot, without him hearing her approach, as if she could move in complete silence. The weekend arrived with an invitation from Jeremy and Michaela to join them for a day trip to La Push Beach on the reservation. Bo agreed mostly, because staying home meant another weekend of rain and solitude and too many thoughts about Edith Cullen. The beach, at least, offered distraction and the possibility of sun, though the forecast promised clouds as usual. They drove down in Jeremy's mother's SUV, a group of 7 students including Alan and several others Bo recognized from various classes. The beach itself was beautiful in a stark way, all grey sand and driftwood logs bleached white by salt and sun, waves crashing against rock formations that jutted from the water like ancient monuments. The temperature was cold despite being April, the wind cutting through Bo's jacket with ease. A group of Quileute teens were already there, building a fire from driftwood, and Jeremy led their group over to join them. Introductions were made, names Bo immediately forgot except for one. Julie Black, Billy's daughter, greeted him with particular warmth when she learned he was Charlie Swan's son. She was tall and beautiful, with long dark hair and a confident smile, and Bo liked her immediately. As the afternoon progressed, as the fire grew and the groups mingled, Bo found himself walking along the beach with Julie, their conversation flowing easily. She asked about Forks High School, about how he was adjusting, about whether he'd met anyone interesting. And when Bo mentioned the Cullens, Julie's expression changed, became guarded. "You know them?" she asked carefully. "I sit next to Edith in biology," Bo said. "They seem nice enough, but kinda strange." Julie was quiet for a moment, looking out at the waves. Then she said, "There are stories about the Cullens, old stories. My great-grandfather told them, and his father before him." "What kind of stories?" "Scary stories." Julie smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Stories about the cold ones, vampires, blood drinkers who look human but aren't. According to the legends, my ancestors made a treaty with them long ago. They could live on their land, but they couldn't come onto our land, the Quilut land, and they had to promise not to hurt humans." Bo laughed, assuming she was joking, but Julie's expression remained serious. "You're talking about the Cullens," he said, his smile fading. "I'm talking about the stories," Julie corrected. "What you believe is up to you." The conversation moved on to safer topics, but Bo's mind stayed fixed on Julie's words. Vampires, the cold ones. It was ridiculous, obviously. Vampires weren't real. They were mythology, fiction, stories parents told to scare children. But that night, alone in his room with rain falling against the windows, Bo opened his laptop and began researching. The search results were overwhelming. Thousands of websites devoted to vampire mythology from cultures around the world. But certain traits appeared repeatedly: pale skin, cold to the touch, impossible beauty, supernatural speed and strength, eyes that reflected light, aversion to sunlight, and above all, the need for blood, human blood, to survive. Bo read until his eyes burned, until the rain outside had stopped and started again, until his rational mind warred with the evidence accumulating before him. It was impossible. Vampires didn't exist. But Edith Cullen matched every description he read. Her coldness, her beauty, her grace, her changing eye color, the way she appeared without sound, the way she never ate. The logical conclusion was insane. But as Bo closed his laptop and lay in darkness, his mind kept returning to those golden eyes, to that marble cold skin, to the sense of danger that lurked beneath Edith's friendly exterior. He should be afraid. He should stay away from her, avoid her, protect himself from whatever she was. But even as he thought it, even as logic demanded self-preservation, Bo knew he wouldn't stay away, couldn't stay away. Whatever Edie the Cullen was, whatever danger she represented, the pull he felt toward her was stronger than fear, stronger than common sense, stronger than the survival instinct that should have sent him running. Tomorrow he would see her in biology. Tomorrow he would sit beside her knowing what he suspected. Tomorrow everything would change, and Bo found himself waiting for that tomorrow with anticipation rather than dread, drawn toward the danger like a moth toward flame, unable to resist even knowing he might be destroyed. Biology class. The following Monday felt charged with unspoken tension, as if the air itself had changed composition over the weekend. Bo sat at their shared lab table, hyper-aware of every movement Edith made, every breath she took that seemed too controlled to be natural, She was beautiful as always, her pale skin luminous in the fluorescent lighting, her golden eyes focused on Mr. Banner's lecture with an attention that seemed almost performative. But Bo could sense something different in her stillness, a quality of waiting that suggested she knew his thoughts had shifted, that the dynamic between them had fundamentally altered. When the class ended, when other students gathered their books and filed toward the door, Edith turned to him with an expression that was both resigned and determined. "Walk with me," she asked, her musical voice carrying an undercurrent of something that might have been nervousness if vampires could feel such human emotions. Bo nodded, unable to speak past the sudden tightness in his throat. They left the building together, Edith leading him away from the parking lot, away from the other students, toward the tree line that bordered the school property. The rain had stopped temporarily, leaving everything dripping and green, the air heavy with moisture and the scent of wet earth and pine. They walked in silence for what felt like miles, but was probably only 20 minutes, moving deeper into the forest along a barely visible trail. Bo struggled to keep up with Edith's pace, his human clumsiness pronounced on the slippery ground, while she moved with effortless grace that barely disturbed the undergrowth. She didn't look back to check if he was following, but somehow she adjusted her speed to match his limitations, staying just ahead, but never disappearing from view. The meadow appeared suddenly, a circular clearing perhaps 100 feet across, filled with wildflowers that shouldn't have been blooming yet, but somehow were. The clouds overhead had thinned slightly, allowing weak sunlight to filter through, and Bo stood at the edge of the clearing catching his breath, while Edith walked to the center and stopped. "I know what you're thinking," she said, her back still to him. "I know what you figured out. Julie Black told you the stories, and you went home and did research, and now you're standing there trying to reconcile what you suspect with what you know to be possible." Bo's heart hammered against his ribs. "How do you know what Julie told me?" "Because I know Julie's family believes the old legends. Because I saw you watching me today with new eyes, looking for confirmation of your suspicions." Edith had turned to face him, her expression unreadable. "And because I've been waiting for this moment since the day you arrived in Forks, knowing it was inevitable, knowing you were too observant not to notice eventually." "Notice what?" Bo asked, though he already knew the answer, had known it since his late-night research session, had perhaps known it on some level since that first day in biology when she looked at him with such barely controlled intensity. Edith took 3 steps forward into the patch of sunlight that had broken through the clouds, and Bo's breath stopped completely. Her skin didn't burn or smoke or blister as vampire mythology suggested it should. Instead, it fractured into 1,000 points of light, scattering rainbows across the meadow grass like she was made of diamonds rather than flesh. She glittered impossibly, each cell reflecting and refracting the light, until she seemed to be something carved from crystal, beautiful and terrible and absolutely inhuman. "This is what I am," she said quietly, her voice carrying clearly across the space between them. "This is why we don't go out in the sunlight where humans can see. Not because it hurts us, but because it reveals us. No human looks like this. No human could explain this away as a trick of the light or unusual skin condition." Bo walked forward slowly, drawn by fascination stronger than fear, until he stood only a few feet from her sparkling form. Up close, the effect was even more dramatic, her skin throwing patterns of light that danced across his own face and hands. "You're beautiful," he said, the words inadequate but true. "I'm a predator," Edith corrected, and her voice held an edge now, something sharp and dangerous. "I'm a killer, Bo. That's what vampires are. We're designed to attract our prey, to lure humans close enough to drain them. Everything about me, my appearance, my voice, even my scent, exists to make humans trust me, want me, lower their defenses so I can kill them more easily." "But you don't," Bo said with certainty he couldn't fully explain. "You don't kill humans." Edith laughed, a sound without humor. "No, my family and I, we've chosen a different path. We call ourselves vegetarians, though that's not quite accurate. We drink animal blood instead of human blood. We hunt deer and elk and mountain lions, anything large enough to sustain us. It's not the same as human blood, doesn't satisfy the thirst the way human blood would, but it allows us to live among humans without being monsters." "How old are you?" The question emerged before Bo could consider whether it was appropriate, but Editha didn't seem offended. "I was born in 1901. I became a vampire in 1918 during the Spanish influenza epidemic. I was 17 years old, dying in a Chicago hospital, when Kareen found me and changed me. That makes me 110 years old, give or take a few months, though I've been 17 for 97 years. Bo tried to process that information, tried to imagine the world Edith had been born into, the changes she'd witnessed, the length of time she'd existed. It was incomprehensible, the kind of lifespan that made his own 17 years seem like a blink, insignificant and brief. "The others," he said, "your family, they're all vampires too?" "Yes. Kareen created most of us, though Royal and Ernest joined our family later. We live as a family unit because it's easier that way, less suspicious. Humans expect young people to live with parents, so Kareen and Ernest play that role. We move every few years whenever people start noticing that we don't age, that we're too different from normal families." "Can you read minds?" Bo asked, remembering legends about vampire powers. Edith's expression shifted, became frustrated. "Not yours. I can hear everyone else's thoughts, every person within several miles, all their fears and desires and secrets constantly broadcasting into my mind. But you're silent. Your thoughts are completely closed to me, and I don't understand why. It's maddening and fascinating in equal measure." The sunlight was fading as clouds moved back across the sky, and Edith's skin slowly returned to its normal pale perfection, the diamond sparkle disappearing as the light diminished. She looked more human now, though Bo knew that appearance was deceptive, that beneath the beautiful exterior was something ancient and dangerous, and not human at all. "That first day," Bo said quietly, "in biology, you looked at me like you hated me, like my presence was physically painful." Edith's expression became anguished, her perfect features twisting with remembered struggle. "Your scent," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Your blood sings to me, Bo. It calls to me in a way that no other human's blood ever has. When I sat next to you that first day, the scent was overwhelming. I wanted to kill you, drain you right there in the classroom. I was barely holding myself back, using every ounce of control I'd developed over a century to keep from attacking you. That's why you disappeared for a week. I ran to Alaska, to another group of vampires who live like we do. I tried to convince myself to stay away from Forks permanently, to let you live your life without the danger I represented. But I couldn't do it. I couldn't stay away. So I hunted constantly, saturated myself with animal blood until the thirst was as controlled as I could make it, and I came back. Came back to see if I could be near you without wanting to kill you. And can you? Bo asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. She'd sat beside him for weeks now without incident, had talked to him, laughed with him, existed in close proximity without attacking. Most of the time, Edith said honestly. It's still difficult. Your scent still calls to me, still makes the monster in me want to take what it craves. But I've learned to control it, to push past the bloodlust and see you as a person rather than prey. It gets easier each day, though I don't know if it will ever be completely easy. Bo should have been afraid. Every survival instinct he possessed should have been screaming at him to run, to get away from the predator standing before him confessing her desire to kill him. But instead, he felt a strange calm, an acceptance that defied logic. He'd been drawn to Edith from that first moment in the cafeteria, pulled toward her by something stronger than reason. Learning she was a vampire didn't change that pull. If anything, it explained it, made sense of the electricity between them, the feeling that she was dangerous and important and meant to be part of his life. I'm not afraid of you, he said, and it was true despite being completely irrational. You should be, Edith said, her voice fierce with warning. I'm dangerous to you, Bo. Being near me puts you at risk every moment. One mistake, one loss of control, and I could kill you before you even realized what was happening. But you won't. I'm trying not to. She took a step closer, her golden eyes searching his face. But I'm also selfish. I should stay away from you completely, should leave Forks and never come back. Let you live a normal human life without vampires complicating it. But I don't want to leave. I want to be near you, want to know you, want to understand why your mind is silent to me when everyone else's thoughts are so loud. Then stay, Bo said simply. I want you to stay. Edith closed the remaining distance between them until only inches separated them, and Bo could feel the cold radiating from her body, could see the way her chest moved with breathing that was habit rather than necessity. This is impossible, she whispered. Humans and vampires don't have relationships. The risk is too great, the difference too fundamental. You'll age and I won't. You'll want things I can't give you. You'll come to resent what I am. Maybe, Bo agreed. Or maybe it's worth trying anyway. Maybe some things are worth the risk. Editha reached up slowly, her cold hand touching his face with a gentleness that contradicted everything she'd said about being a predator. Her skin against his was like marble, hard and smooth and impossibly cold. But Bo didn't pull away. He leaned into her touch, and Edith's expression transformed, became something tender and wondering and almost painful in its vulnerability. I've fallen in love with you, she said, the confession emerging like something torn from her chest. Despite every reason not to, despite the danger and the impossibility and the absolute certainty that this will end badly. I love you, Bo Swan, and I don't know how to stop. Then don't stop, Bo said, his own hand rising to cover hers, where it rested against his cheek. Don't stop, and don't leave, and let's figure out the rest as we go. The clouds closed completely overhead, and the rain began again, soft drops falling through the forest canopy into the meadow around them. But neither of them moved, standing together in the growing darkness while the impossible became real and the dangerous became accepted, and two creatures separated by species and mortality found common ground in the space between heartbeats. "There are rules," Edith said finally, though she didn't pull away. "If we're going to do this, if we're going to try, there have to be boundaries. I can't be too close when I'm thirsty. I can't risk losing control. And you have to understand that my world is dangerous, that being with me means accepting risks you shouldn't have to accept." "I understand," Bo said, though he suspected he didn't. Not really, not yet. But he would learn, would navigate whatever dangers came with loving a vampire, because the alternative was walking away, and that felt impossible now. They walked back through the forest together as darkness fell completely. Edith's cold hand wrapped around his warm one, and Bo felt his life dividing into before and after this moment. Before, when he'd been fully human, living a human life with human concerns, and after, when he'd stepped into the supernatural world and chosen to stay despite every logical reason to flee. The rain continued falling as they reached the parking lot, as Edith released his hand and stepped toward her silver Volvo, where Royal waited with patient stillness. She looked back once, her golden eyes meeting his in the darkness, and Bo felt that connection again, that pull that transcended logic and spoke to something deeper than thought. "Tomorrow," she said, a promise and a question combined. "Tomorrow," Bo agreed, and watched her drive away into the rainy darkness, taking a piece of his heart with her into the dangerous, beautiful world she inhabited. The days following the meadow confession transformed Bo's existence in ways he couldn't have anticipated. What had been a gradual pull toward Edith Cullen became an all-consuming gravitational force that reorganized every aspect of his life around her presence. They were inseparable at school, sitting together in biology, eating lunch at the Cullen table despite the stares and whispered speculation from other students, walking between classes with Edith's cold hand wrapped around his warm one, in defiance of every boundary that should have existed between them. Michaela's jealousy became palpable, her friendly warmth replaced by thinly veiled hostility whenever Bo appeared with Edith. Jeremy tried to maintain neutrality, but even he seemed confused by Bo's sudden absorption into the Cullen family's orbit. The other students watched with curiosity that bordered on disbelief, unable to comprehend how the new kid from Arizona had managed to breach the impenetrable social fortress the Cullens had maintained for years. Bo understood their confusion because he felt it himself. Every moment with Edith carried an element of unreality, as if he'd stepped sideways into a dream where the impossible operated under different rules. She was a vampire, a predator who'd existed for over a century, whose very nature demanded she see humans as food rather than companions. Yet she chose to be with him, chose to fight her instincts daily, chose to transform something that should have been predator and prey into something that resembled love. Editha explained vampire nature during their time together, filling in gaps in Bo's understanding with patient detail. Vampires were frozen at the Uhat moment of transformation, their bodies unchanging, incapable of growth or aging or any alteration whatsoever. Their strength was tremendous, allowing them to crush stone and bend metal with minimal effort. Their speed made them blurred to human vision, covering miles in minutes. Their senses operated at levels humans couldn't comprehend, hearing heartbeats from hundreds of feet away, tracking scents across vast distances, seeing in complete darkness as if it were daylight. "We're designed to be perfect predators," Edith said one afternoon as they sat in her silver Volvo in the school parking lot, rain drumming against the roof in its endless rhythm. "Everything about us exists to make hunting easier. Our beauty attracts prey. Our speed ensures they can't escape. Our strength guarantees a quick kill. Even our venom serves a purpose, transforming our victims into more of our kind if we choose to let them survive the feeding." "But your family doesn't hunt humans," Bo said, repeating what he'd learned, what he clung to as evidence that vampires could choose something other than their nature. "We don't," Edith agreed. "Carrion started it centuries ago, choosing to feed on animals instead of humans, developing the self-control necessary to exist among humans without killing them. The rest of us learn from her example. Royal and Jessamine struggle more than the others because they're newer to our lifestyle, only a few decades rather than centuries of practice. But we all maintain the choice, even when the thirst becomes overwhelming." The thirst, Bo learned, was constant. A burning sensation in their throats that animal blood dulled but never completely satisfied. Human blood would quench it properly, would provide the satisfaction their bodies craved, but the Cullens denied themselves that relief. They hunted frequently, sometimes every few days, disappearing into the forest to track deer or elk, or the occasional mountain lion that wandered down from the mountains. "Your eyes change color," Bo observed, studying Edith's face in the grey light filtering through the windshield. "They're gold now, but they were black that first day." "Black means we're thirsty," Edith explained. "The longer we go without feeding, the darker our eyes become. Gold means we've fed recently, that the thirst is controlled. When we drink human blood, our eyes turn red, bright red, like you'd expect from something in a horror movie. It's one of the ways you can identify vampires who feed on humans rather than animals." The weekend arrived with an invitation Bo had been both anticipating and dreading. Editha wanted him to meet her family properly, to visit the Cullen house and spend time with the vampires he'd only observed from a distance. Bo agreed despite his nervousness, understanding that meeting the family represented a significant step in whatever relationship he and Edith were building. The Cullen house sat miles outside Forks, hidden in the forest at the end of a long private drive. It was modern and beautiful, all glass and white wood, designed to blend with the surrounding trees, while somehow standing apart from them. The architecture suggested wealth without ostentation, permanence without pretension. Edith parked in the circular driveway, and Bo saw faces appear at the windows, vampires who'd been waiting for their arrival. Dr. Corinne Cullen greeted them at the door, and Bo was struck immediately by her warmth despite her supernatural coldness. She looked barely older than Edith, perhaps 25, with pale blonde hair and gentle golden eyes that radiated compassion. Her handshake was carefully controlled, her marble hard hand barely squeezing his, mindful of her strength against his fragility. "Welcome, Bo," she said, her voice carrying the same musical quality all vampires seem to possess. "We're so happy Editha has finally brought you to visit. She's talked of little else for weeks." Ernest Cullen appeared behind his wife, tall and dark-haired with a kind face that suggested eternal patience. He welcomed Beau with similar warmth, offering to give him a tour of the house, while Edith dealt with her siblings' inevitable interrogation. Beau accepted gratefully, following Ernest through rooms that were both luxurious and comfortable, filled with art and books, and evidence of lives lived with attention to beauty. The living room held a grand piano, its black surface polished to mirror brightness. Ernest explained that Edith played, that music was one of her great passions, that she'd spent decades mastering instruments that humans took lifetimes to learn. The walls held paintings from various centuries, some Beau recognized from art history classes, others completely unfamiliar but clearly valuable. Everything in the house spoke of wealth accumulated over time, of vampires who'd had centuries to collect and curate and build comfortable existence. Eleanor and Archie found Beau in the music room, appearing with that unnerving vampire silence that made it impossible to hear them approach. Eleanor was tall and statuesque, with the same blonde hair as Royal, her beauty cold and perfect like carved ice. But her smile was genuine as she assessed Beau with golden eyes that saw more than he was comfortable revealing. "So you're the boy who's captured Edith's attention," Eleanor said, circling Beau with predatory grace. "I was beginning to think she'd never find anyone interesting enough to bother with." "Be nice, Ellie," Archie said, appearing at Beau's other side, his small frame and spiky black hair giving him an elfin appearance that belied his vampire nature. "You're scaring him." "He should be scared," Eleanor said, though her tone was teasing rather than threatening. Dating a vampire is dangerous business. One wrong move and Edith could drain him dry before she even realized what she was doing. "She won't," Archie said with absolute certainty. "I've seen it. They stay together, and their future is complicated but stable. Well, mostly stable. There are some concerning moments, but overall, the relationship survives." Beau stared at him. "You can see the future?" "In a manner of speaking," Archie said, his expression becoming distant for a moment, as if looking at something only he could perceive. "I see decisions and their probable outcomes. The future isn't fixed. It changes based on choices people make, but I can track the most likely paths forward. Right now, I see you and Edith together for a long time. The specifics are blurry, but the connection remains strong." Royal and Jessamine appeared last, and Beau felt the atmosphere in the room change immediately. Royal was intimidating in the way that came from absolute confidence in one's own power, his blonde hair and perfect features arranged in an expression of barely concealed hostility. Jessamine stood slightly behind him, her honey-colored hair falling in waves around a face that was beautiful, but somehow damaged, scarred by experiences Beau couldn't imagine. "You're taking a risk being here," Royal said bluntly, his golden eyes fixed on Beau with unnerving intensity. "Being around so many vampires when you're human and fragile. One of us could kill you accidentally just by moving too fast or forgetting our strength." "Royal," Edith said sharply, appearing in the doorway with that vampire speed that made Beau's eyes struggle to track her movement. "Don't threaten him." "I'm not threatening," Royal said, though his tone suggested otherwise. "I'm stating facts. He should understand the danger he's in." Jessamine touched Royal's arm gently, and Beau felt a wave of calm wash over him, artificial but effective. "We won't hurt him," she said quietly, her voice carrying a slight southern accent. "We've all learned control. Even I can manage being in the same room with him, and I'm the newest to our lifestyle." The tension in the room eased, and Bo realized that Jessamine's touch had influenced more than just him. Royal's hostilities softened, his aggressive posture relaxing into something more neutral. Edith had mentioned that Jessamine could manipulate emotions, could make people feel whatever she wanted them to feel, and Bo was witnessing that ability in action. The rest of the afternoon passed in conversation and observation, Bo gradually becoming more comfortable in the presence of 7 vampires who could kill him without effort, but chose instead to treat him with careful kindness. They asked about his life, his interests, his plans for the future. They shared carefully edited versions of their own histories, stories that revealed glimpses of the centuries they'd lived without exposing the full darkness of their past. Edith showed him her room, a space that reflected a century of accumulated interests. Shelves held thousands of CDs organized by genre and era, representing every musical movement from the early 20th century to the present. Books filled the floor-to-ceiling cases, many in languages Bo couldn't read, leather-bound volumes that looked older than the United States. The walls held artwork she'd created herself, paintings and sketches that demonstrated skill developed over decades of practice. "This is your life," Bo said, looking around at the evidence of time he couldn't comprehend. "A century of collecting and learning and experiencing things I can't imagine." "It's lonely," Edith said quietly, sitting on the leather sofa that dominated one wall, watching the world change, watching humans live and age and die while you remain frozen. "My family helps, having people who understand what it's like to be unchanging in a changing world, but it's still lonely until you." Bo sat beside her, his warm body contrasting with her cold one, the difference between them obvious and insurmountable. "I'll age," he said, voicing the concern that had been growing in his mind. "I'll get old while you stay 17. Eventually people will think you're my daughter, not my girlfriend." "I know," Edith said, her expression pained. "I've thought about that constantly, about what it means to love someone who's mortal, who has decades at most while I have centuries, about watching you grow old and die while I continue existing without you." "There's another option," Bo said carefully, knowing he was approaching dangerous territory. "You could change me, make me like you. Then we'd have forever instead of just decades." Edith's expression hardened immediately, her golden eyes becoming fierce. "No, I won't damn you to this existence, Bo. I won't steal your soul and condemn you to being a monster." "You're not a monster," Bo argued. "Your family isn't monsters. You choose not to hurt humans. You've built good lives despite what you are. We've built pale imitations of human lives," Edith countered. "We don't sleep, don't dream, don't grow or change or experience any of the things that make human existence meaningful. We're frozen, Bo, stuck in an eternal present without the possibility of real growth. I won't inflict that on you." They argued about transformation frequently over the following weeks, Bo gradually becoming more certain that he wanted eternity with Edith, while she remained absolutely opposed to changing him. The disagreement created tension between them, moments when the impossibility of their situation became obvious and painful. But they always returned to each other, unable to stay apart despite the fundamental differences in their perspectives. Editha began appearing at Beau's window at night, climbing the side of the house with effortless grace to sit on his bed while he slept. She watched him with the intensity of someone memorizing every detail, explained that she was fascinated by sleep, by dreams, by the human vulnerability she'd lost when she became vampire. Beau woke sometimes to find her there, her cold presence beside him, her golden eyes luminous in the darkness. "Tell me what you dreamed," she would ask, and Beau would recount whatever fragments he remembered, giving her vicarious access to the human experience she mourned losing. In exchange, she told him about her human life, about growing up in Chicago in the early 1900s, about dying of influenza while her city burned with fever, about waking as a vampire with Karin's patient guidance. Charlie noticed Beau's attachment to Edith with the concerned confusion of a father who wanted his son happy but recognized danger when he saw it. He mentioned that Billy Black had concerns about the Cullens, that the Quileute people didn't trust them, that maybe Beau should be careful about getting too involved. Beau deflected, assuring Charlie that Edith and her family were good people, knowing his father couldn't understand the truth, even if Beau tried to explain it. The spring progressed with Beau falling deeper into Edith's world with every passing day, learning the boundaries of what they could share, discovering that love between human and vampire required constant negotiation of danger and desire. They couldn't be too close when she was thirsty. They couldn't touch too intimately without risking her losing control. Every kiss was carefully controlled, every embrace measured against her strength and his fragility. But despite the complications, despite the danger and the impossibility and the absolute certainty that their relationship defied every reasonable expectation, Beau found himself happier than he'd ever been. Edith was extraordinary, brilliant and kind, and fascinating in ways that had nothing to do with her supernatural nature. She challenged him intellectually, made him laugh, treated him as an equal despite the vast difference in their ages and experiences. And when she looked at him with those golden eyes filled with impossible love, Beau knew he would face whatever dangers came, accept whatever risks their relationship demanded, because walking away was no longer an option his heart would allow. The thunderstorm announced itself 3 days before it arrived, a distant rumble on the weather forecast that made Archie's eyes light up with anticipatory excitement. Beau had learned to recognize that particular expression on the small vampire's face, the way his features arranged themselves when he saw something pleasant in the constantly shifting futures only he could perceive. At lunch on Wednesday, Archie appeared at their table with barely contained enthusiasm, his spiky black hair seeming to vibrate with energy. "Saturday," he announced, dropping into the seat beside Edith with the grace that made all vampire movements look choreographed. "There's going to be a massive thunderstorm Saturday afternoon. Perfect conditions. We haven't had weather like this in months." "Perfect conditions for what?" Beau asked, though Edith's sudden smile suggested she already knew the answer. "Baseball," Eleanor said from across the table, her beautiful face transformed by genuine excitement. "We only play during thunderstorms because we need the thunder to mask the sound. Otherwise, people would hear us from miles away and come investigating why it sounds like explosions in the forest." "The sound of what?" Beau asked, intrigued despite himself. "The bat hitting the ball," Royal explained, his usually stern expression softening slightly. "When vampires play baseball, we play at vampire speed and vampire strength. The crack of the bat is loud enough to echo for miles. Thunder covers it, lets us actually cut loose and play properly. You should come watch," Edith said, turning to Bo with invitation clear in her golden eyes. "It's quite a spectacle. I promise you've never seen baseball played like this." Bo agreed immediately, curious to see the Cullens engaged in something recreational, something that demonstrated the power they usually kept carefully controlled around him. The days leading up to Saturday passed with anticipatory energy. Edith describing previous games with an enthusiasm that revealed how much she enjoyed these rare opportunities to fully embrace her vampire nature without restraint. Saturday arrived with appropriately dramatic weather, the sky darkening to charcoal grey by early afternoon, wind whipping through the trees with a force that sent smaller branches tumbling to the ground. Charlie had plans to go fishing with Billy Black down at the reservation, conveniently providing Bo an excuse to be away from the house for the afternoon. He told his father he was spending time with the Cullens, which was true, and Charlie accepted the explanation with the weary resignation of someone who'd realized his son was going to spend time with Edith Cullen, regardless of any concerns he might have. Edith picked Bo up in the silver Volvo, just as the first raindrops began falling, fat and heavy and promising deluge. They drove north into the mountains, following increasingly narrow roads that eventually disappeared entirely, replaced by rough tracks that would have destroyed a normal vehicle, but barely registered to the Volvo's suspension. The forest grew denser as they climbed, the trees pressing close on both sides, their branches forming a canopy that blocked what little light penetrated the storm clouds. The clearing appeared suddenly, a vast open space perhaps 300 feet across, ringed by towering evergreens that swayed in the strengthening wind. The Cullens were already there, moving through the clearing with casual grace that looked like dancing, their pale forms bright against the dark green of the surrounding forest. They dressed for the occasion, wearing casual clothes that somehow still managed to look elegant, and they greeted Bo's arrival with welcoming smiles. "Welcome to Cullen Family Baseball," Ernest said, his kind face alight with pleasure at having an audience. "We promise it'll be more interesting than anything you've seen at a normal stadium." The first thunder rolled across the sky, deep and resonant, and the vampires reacted like athletes hearing the starting gun. Archie produced a baseball from seemingly nowhere, tossing it to Eleanor with a speed that made the ball blur. She caught it effortlessly, her reflexes operating at levels that made the motion look easy, despite being physically impossible for humans. "I'll umpire," Edith said, taking up position behind where home plate would be if this clearing had been a proper baseball diamond. "Bo can call balls and strikes with me." The game began with the next thunder roll, and Bo immediately understood why they needed the storm. Royal took the mound first, his massive form coiling like a spring before releasing the ball with explosive force. The sound of the ball leaving his hand was like a gunshot, and it crossed the distance to Archie at the plate faster than Bo's eyes could track. Archie's swing connected with another crack that coincided perfectly with a thunder boom, and the ball rocketed skyward, disappearing into the clouds with velocity that defied physics. Eleanor was already running, moving so fast she seemed to teleport from base to base, her feet barely touching the ground. Jessamine tracked the ball's trajectory with preternatural awareness, positioning herself precisely where it would fall, despite the ball being invisible in the storm clouds. She caught it one-handed without looking up, and Archie was out despite having crossed 2 bases in the seconds it took for the play to complete. That was incredible, Bo breathed, his heart racing from witnessing abilities he'd known intellectually the vampires possessed, but had never seen fully unleashed. "Just wait," Edith said, her eyes shining with pleasure at his reaction. "It gets better." She was right. The game continued with increasing spectacle, each play demonstrating different aspects of vampire capability. Royal pitched with variations in speed and trajectory that would have been impossible for human muscles. Eleanor hit balls that traveled hundreds of feet before falling. Jessamine made diving catches that covered impossible distances. Ernest ran the bases with speed that made him blur. And through it all, the thunder provided percussion, nature's drumbeat matching the supernatural performance. Bo watched in awe, understanding for the first time what Edith had meant when she said vampires were designed to be perfect predators. The strength, the speed, the grace, all of it combined to create beings that operated on an entirely different physical plane than humans. They were beautiful in their power, terrible in their capability, and Bo felt both privileged to witness this display and acutely aware of his own fragility in comparison. The storm intensified as the game progressed, rain falling in sheets that soaked everything, wind howling through the trees with force that bent their trunks. Lightning fractured the sky with increasing frequency, and the thunder became constant, a rolling boom that never quite faded before the next strike added to the cacophony. The vampires seemed energized by the weather, playing with even greater abandon, their movements becoming almost impossible to track as they pushed the limits of their abilities. And then, in a moment between thunder rolls, in a brief pocket of relative quiet, Archie went completely still. His body froze mid-motion, one foot raised to run to first base, his expression transforming from joy to something that looked like horror. The other Cullens stopped immediately, all of them turning to face Archie with the instant awareness that came from centuries of trusting his visions. "3 are coming," Archie said, his voice cutting through the rain and wind with preternatural clarity. "They heard us playing and they're curious. They'll be here in less than 5 minutes." "How many vegetarians?" Karine asked, moving to stand beside her adopted son with protective instinct that transcended their supernatural natures. "None," Archie said grimly. "Their eyes are red, and one of them is a tracker." The atmosphere in the clearing changed instantly. Playfulness replaced by tension that made the air feel heavy despite the wind. The Cullens formed a loose protective circle around Bo without seeming to move, their casual positions suddenly strategic, their relaxed postures becoming alert without obvious change. Edith appeared at Bo's side so quickly he didn't see her move, her cold hand gripping his with barely controlled fear. "Maybe we can leave before they arrive," she said urgently, pulling Bo toward the Volvo. "Too late," Royal said, his massive form blocking their path. "They're already too close. Running now would make them chase, and we can't outrun them with Bo slowing us down. Better to stay, be friendly, hope they move on quickly." "If they catch his scent," Edie started, but Karine cut her off. Then we deal with it. But panicking helps no one. Everyone stay calm. Be polite. Let me do the talking. The three vampires emerged from the tree line with the silent grace their kind possessed, moving into the clearing as if they belonged there, as if stumbling upon other vampires playing baseball in a thunderstorm was an everyday occurrence. They were beautiful, like all vampires were beautiful, but there was something wilder about them, something less civilized than the Cullens. They wore dirty clothes, their hair unkempt, and their eyes glowed bright crimson even in the dim stormlight. The tallest was a woman, dark-haired and athletic, moving with the focused intensity of a predator actively hunting. Beside her walked a man with orange hair and a friendly smile that didn't quite reach his red eyes. The third vampire hung back slightly, a massive male whose size rivaled Royal's, his expression neutral and watchful. "Hello," the dark-haired woman said, her voice pleasant despite the tension crackling through the clearing. "I'm Joss. This is Victor, and that's Logan. We heard the game from miles away and got curious. Mind if we join you for a few innings?" "Of course," Karine said smoothly, stepping forward with diplomatic grace. "I'm Karine Cullen. This is my family. We were just enjoying the weather. You're welcome to play." Joss's eyes swept across the Cullens, assessing, cataloguing, and then they landed on Beau. Her expression didn't change, but something in her gaze sharpened, focused, became intensely interested in a way that made Beau's heart rate accelerate involuntarily. She inhaled deeply, and Beau saw her eyes widen fractionally as his scent registered. "You brought a snack," she said, her tone conversational. But every vampire in the clearing tensed at the words. The wind shifted suddenly, carrying Beau's scent directly toward the three nomads, and Joss's entire demeanor transformed. Her friendly expression vanished, replaced by naked hunger, by the fixed stare of a predator who just identified prey. She took one step forward, then another, her movements becoming purposeful, directed, inevitable. The Cullens moved as one unit, forming a barrier between Joss and Beau with coordinated precision that suggested they'd practiced this formation. Edith positioned herself directly in front of Beau, her body rigid with protective fury, a low growl rumbling from her chest that Beau had never heard before. "He's with us," Karine said, her voice carrying authority that made even Joss pause. "He's under our protection." Joss stopped her advance but didn't retreat. Her crimson eyes locked on Beau with unblinking intensity. "Interesting," she said softly. "I've never heard of a coven keeping a human as a pet. How deliciously strange." "We're leaving," Royal said, his voice leaving no room for argument. "Now." Victor stepped forward, placing a restraining hand on Joss's arm. "We don't want trouble," he said to Karine. "We respect territory. We'll move on." But Joss's eyes never left Beau, her attention so focused it felt physical, like pressure against his skin. She smiled slowly, showing teeth that were too white, too perfect, designed for tearing flesh. "The boy smells extraordinary," she said. "Such a shame to waste something so appealing." "He's not being wasted," Edith snarled, and the sound was utterly inhuman, the voice of a vampire defending what belonged to her. The moment stretched, tension building until it felt like the air itself might crack. Then Victor pulled harder on Joss's arm, and she allowed herself to be led backward, though her eyes remained fixed on Beau until the trees blocked her view. The three nomads disappeared into the forest, and the Cullens held their protective formation for several more seconds before Kareen exhaled with relief. "Go," she said to Edith. "Take Bo home. Now. The rest of us will track them. Make sure they leave the area." Edith didn't argue, simply grabbed Bo and ran for the Volvo at vampire speed, moving so fast that Bo's feet barely touched the ground. They were in the car and driving away before Bo could fully process what had happened. Edith's hands gripping the steering wheel hard enough that the leather creaked under the pressure. "That was a tracker," she said, her voice shaking with fear and fury. "Archie said one of them was a tracker, and of course it was the one who fixated on you. This is bad, Bo. This is really bad." "What's a tracker?" Bo asked, though some part of him already knew, had seen it in Joss's eyes, in the way she'd stared at him with absolute focus. "A vampire who hunts for sport," Edith said grimly. "Once they lock onto prey, they don't stop until they've succeeded or been destroyed. And Joss just locked onto you." The Cullen house became a war room in the hours following the baseball game, every vampire moving with urgent purpose as they strategized how to protect Bo from a threat they'd never anticipated facing. Kareen stood at the center of the living room, her usual gentle demeanor replaced by the commanding presence of someone who'd survived centuries through careful planning and decisive action. Royal and Ernest flanked her, their expressions grim, while Archie paced near the windows with his eyes distant, watching futures shift and change with every decision they considered. Edith sat beside Bo on the leather sofa, her cold hand gripping his with barely controlled desperation, her golden eyes flickering occasionally toward black as fear and fury warred within her. She hadn't spoken since they'd fled the clearing, her jaw clenched tight against words that would only waste precious time. But Bo could feel her anguish radiating from her marble-cold body, could sense her guilt at having brought him into her world and exposed him to dangers he had no defense against. "Joss is a tracker," Kareen said, her voice cutting through the tense silence. "The most dangerous kind of vampire because the hunt is everything to her. Once she's locked onto prey, she won't stop until she's succeeded or been destroyed. Running won't help because she'll follow. Hiding is temporary at best. She's legendary among our kind for never losing a target." "Then we destroy her," Royal said flatly, his massive hands curling into fists. "We hunt the hunter. 7 against 1, she won't stand a chance." "She won't fight us directly," Archie said, his attention still focused on invisible futures. "I see her using misdirection, false trails, psychological warfare. She's not interested in fighting other vampires. She wants Bo specifically, wants to prove she can take him despite our protection." "Why?" Bo asked, his voice sounding small in the room full of vampires. "Why does she want me specifically? There are millions of humans she could hunt instead." "Because you're protected," Edith said quietly, speaking for the first time since they'd arrived. "Because we claim you, and she sees that as a challenge. Trackers, like Joss, live for the difficult hunts, the ones that require strategy and skill. You're not just prey to her, you're a trophy." The words settled over Bo like a shroud, the understanding that he'd become a target not through any action of his own, but simply because he'd fallen in love with a vampire. The unfairness of it sparked anger in his chest, burning away some of the fear that had been paralyzing him since Joss's eyes had locked onto his in the clearing. "What's the plan?" he asked, straightening his spine, refusing to be simply a victim requiring rescue. Karine moved to stand directly in front of him, her ancient eyes assessing him with the clinical precision of someone who'd been a doctor for centuries. "We need to remove you from Forks immediately. Joss will expect us to keep you here, to fortify our position and dare her to attack. Instead, we'll send you south with Eleanor and Jessamine. They'll take you somewhere public, somewhere with enough human witnesses that Joss will have difficulty attacking without exposing herself." "Phoenix," Bo said immediately. "My mother is in Jacksonville with her husband, so her house is empty, and I know the city better than anywhere else." "Phoenix is predictable," Royal argued. "Joss will anticipate that choice. She'll research Bo's background, discover his connection to the city, potentially use it against us." "Everywhere is predictable," Archie countered, his eyes focusing on the present again. "I can track her decisions through my visions, watch which path she chooses. If she heads toward Phoenix, we'll know and adjust accordingly. Right now, I see her staying near Forks initially, trying to pick up Bo's scent trail. Edith, Royal, and Ernest will lay false trails," Karine continued. "Lead her away from Bo's actual location. Make her waste time tracking dead ends. Archie and I will remain in Forks, maintain the appearance of normalcy so no one suspects anything is wrong. The key is keeping Bo moving until Joss makes a mistake we can exploit. I'm not leaving you," Edith said fiercely, turning to face Karine with defiance clear in her expression. "I won't let Bo face this danger without me." "You're exactly what Joss expects," Karine said gently. "She knows you love him, knows you'll want to stay close. That makes you predictable, and predictability is dangerous against a tracker. Eleanor and Jessamine are better choices because Joss doesn't know them as well, can't anticipate their strategies as easily." The argument that followed was intense, Edith insisting she wouldn't abandon Bo, while Karine explained with patient firmness why Edith's presence would actually endanger him more. Finally, after Archie confirmed through his visions that Eleanor and Jessamine offered the highest probability of keeping Bo safe, Edith conceded with visible reluctance. "But I'm coming to Phoenix as soon as we've led Joss far enough away," Edith said, her tone brooking no argument. "The moment she's distracted, I'm joining you." The practicalities came next. Rapid-fire planning that demonstrated centuries of vampire experience with crisis management. Bo would need to leave Forks immediately, tonight, in a way that wouldn't raise suspicion with Charlie. A fight, they decided. A dramatic argument that would explain why Bo stormed out and didn't return. It would hurt Charlie, would damage their relationship temporarily, but it would keep him safe by providing a mundane explanation for Bo's disappearance. Bo's stomach twisted at the thought of hurting his father, of using Charlie's love against him to facilitate his escape. But the alternative was staying in Forks and potentially leading a vampire tracker to everyone he cared about. The choice wasn't really a choice at all. They drove to Charlie's house in the silver Volvo, Edith behind the wheel with Bo in the passenger seat, their hands clasped together with desperate intensity. The rain had started again, steady and soft, the world outside reduced to shadows and wet streets illuminated by occasional streetlights. Everything looked normal, peaceful, completely unaware of the supernatural danger converging on this small town. "I'm sorry," Edith whispered as they pulled into the driveway. "I'm so sorry I brought this into your life. You should hate me for it." "I could never hate you," Bo said. bringing her cold hand to his lips. "This isn't your fault. You didn't ask for Joss to fixate on me. I asked for you to be part of my world," Editha countered. "I knew it was dangerous, knew there were vampires who wouldn't share my family's values, knew that loving you meant putting you at risk. I did it anyway because I was selfish, because I wanted you despite the danger. And I wanted you," Bo said firmly. "I chose this, Edith. I chose you knowing what you were, knowing the risks. Don't take that choice away from me by claiming all the responsibility." They sat in the darkened truck for another moment, memorizing each other's faces, preparing for a separation that neither wanted but both understood was necessary. Then Bo climbed out into the rain and walked toward his house, toward the father he was about to hurt, toward the lie he would tell to save both their lives. Charlie was watching television in the living room, still in his police uniform, a beer on the table beside his recliner. He looked up when Bo entered, smiled with the easy affection that made what Bo had to do even harder. "You're home early. Thought you'd be at the Cullens' place until later." "I'm leaving," Bo said, keeping his voice flat, emotionless. "I'm going back to Phoenix, tonight." Charlie's smile faltered, confusion replacing contentment. "What? Why? Did something happen?" "I can't stay here anymore," Bo continued, hating himself with every word. "This town is suffocating. I hate the rain, hate the cold, hate being stuck in the middle of nowhere with nothing to do. I tried to make it work for you, but I can't do it anymore." "Bo, wait," Charlie said, rising from his chair with concern clear in his expression. "If something's wrong, we can talk about it. Don't just run away." "I'm not running away," Bo said, putting cold certainty into his voice that he didn't feel. "I'm going home. Phoenix is home. This place never was and never will be. I only came here because Mom needed me to, but I'm done sacrificing what I want for other people." The words hit Charlie like physical blows, each one landing with visible impact. His face cycled through emotions, confusion and hurt and anger competing for dominance. "You're leaving because of the Cullen girl," he said finally. "Because I asked you to be careful around her." "This has nothing to do with Editha," Bo lied. "This is about me realizing I made a mistake thinking I could live here. I'm calling Mom to tell her I'm coming back. Don't try to stop me." He turned and climbed the stairs before Charlie could respond, before his father could see the tears threatening to break through Bo's careful control. In his room, he threw clothes into a bag with shaking hands, grabbed his laptop and phone charger, took one last look at the space that had almost become home. The photograph of Renee on his desk made his chest tighten, but he left it there, knowing that taking it would reveal the lie, would show Charlie that this wasn't a teenage tantrum, but something far more serious. Downstairs, Charlie stood in the hallway, his face pale and stricken. "Bo, please, don't do this. If I said something wrong, if I pushed too hard about the Cullens, I'm sorry. But don't leave like this." "I'm sorry too," Bo said, and that at least was completely true. "But I have to go." He walked past his father, out into the rain, toward the Volvo, where Edith waited with anguish clear in her golden eyes. Charlie followed onto the porch, calling Bo's name, asking him to wait, to think about this, to not throw away their relationship over one argument. But Bo climbed into the truck and didn't look back, couldn't look back without breaking completely. Editha drove away from the house with vampire speed, the truck's tires throwing up sheets of water as they accelerated into the rainy darkness. In the rearview mirror, Bo caught one glimpse of his father standing on the porch, alone and confused, before the night swallowed him completely. "I hate this," Bo said, his voice breaking. "I hate hurting him." "I know," Edith said softly, "but you saved his life tonight. Joss would have used him against you if you'd stayed. This way, he's safe, even if he's hurt." They drove to the Cullen house where Eleanor and Jessamine waited with a rental car, keys in hand, bags already packed. The transfer happened quickly. Edith's goodbye a fierce embrace that conveyed everything words couldn't. And then Bo was in the back seat of an unfamiliar car with two vampires he barely knew, driving south through the darkness toward an uncertain future, leaving behind everyone he loved to protect them from the danger loving him had created. The hunt had begun. The hotel room in Phoenix had become a prison over the past 3 days, the bland walls and generic furniture closing in around Bo with claustrophobic intensity. Eleanor and Jessamine rotated guard duty with mechanical efficiency, one always present while the other hunted or checked the perimeter, their golden eyes constantly scanning for threats that might materialize at any moment. Archie sat in the corner for hours at a time, his gaze distant and unfocused, as he watched futures branch and shift, with every decision made by people hundreds of miles away. Bo tried to read, tried to watch television, tried to sleep through the daylight hours when his exhaustion finally overcame his anxiety. But his mind refused to settle, constantly replaying the baseball game. Joss's crimson eyes locking onto him with predatory focus. The sudden transformation of a pleasant afternoon into a nightmare that had forced him to flee everything familiar. His phone sat on the nightstand, silenced but still visible, and he resisted the urge to call Charlie, to hear his father's voice and confirm he was safe, even though Bo couldn't explain why he'd called or where he was. Edith phoned twice a day, her musical voice strained with worry and frustration as she reported on their progress leading Joss away from Phoenix. The tracker had followed their false trails initially, chasing Edith and Royal through Washington and into Canada. But Archie's visions showed her doubling back, circling closer to Phoenix with the inexorable patience of someone who knew her prey would eventually make a mistake. Time was running out, and everyone could feel it. On the third afternoon, as grey storm clouds gathered over the desert in a rare display of spring weather, Bo's phone rang with a number he didn't recognize. He stared at it for 3 rings, Eleanor moving to stand beside him with sudden alertness, before answering with a caution that felt like premonition. "Bo?" His mother's voice, but wrong somehow, tight with fear that Renee rarely showed. "Bo, honey, you need to listen to me very carefully." "Mom?" Bo's heart rate accelerated, adrenaline flooding his system with the certainty that something was terribly wrong. "What's happening? Where are you?" "I'm in Phoenix, at the old ballet studio, where you used to take lessons. Do you remember it? On Cactus and 58th. Renee's words came fast, tumbling over each other with barely controlled panic. "Someone has me here, Bo. A woman. She says if you don't come alone, if you bring your friends, she'll kill me. You have to come right now. Please, baby, I'm so scared." The phone went dead before Bo could respond, leaving him staring at the blank screen while his mind raced through impossible options. Eleanor had heard every word with her vampire hearing, her expression transforming from alertness to horror as the implications registered. She reached for Beau's phone, but he pulled away, already moving toward the desk where hotel stationery waited. "She has my mother," Beau said, his voice surprisingly steady, despite the terror clawing at his chest. "I have to go." "It's a trap," Eleanor said urgently. "Joss researched your background, found your mother's information, lured her to that studio somehow. Or she's using a recording, faking your mother's voice. Either way, if you go there, you'll die. If I don't go, my mother dies," Beau countered, scribbling a note with shaking hands. "I can't let that happen. I won't let her die because I fell in love with a vampire." "Archie," Eleanor called, and the small vampire materialized beside them with that unnerving speed. Show him what happens if he goes there alone." Archie's golden eyes met Beau's, and his expression held more sorrow than Beau had ever seen on the usually cheerful vampire's face. "I see Joss," he said quietly. "I see her attacking you, breaking bones, draining blood. I see you dying in that studio while she films it to hurt Edith. The probability is over 90% if you go alone." "And my mother?" Beau asked. "What probability does she have if I don't go?" Archie's silence was answer enough. The future he saw contained only two paths, both ending in death, and Beau had to choose which death he could live with, which sacrifice he could make, and still recognize himself afterward. It wasn't really a choice at all. "I'm sorry," Beau said, finishing the note and placing it on the desk, where Edith would find it when she arrived. "Tell her I love her. Tell her I couldn't let my mother die. Tell her I'm sorry I couldn't be what she needed." He moved toward the door with desperate speed, but Eleanor blocked his path with vampire reflexes that made resistance futile. Her beautiful face showed anguish as she gripped his shoulders, her marble-hard hands gentle despite their strength. "Please," she said, and her voice held a century of loss and understanding. "Please don't do this. We can find another way. We can save your mother without sacrificing you." "There's no time," Beau said, pulling free from her grasp through sheer desperation rather than actual strength. "By the time Editha gets here, by the time you coordinate with the others, my mother will be dead. This is the only way." Jessamine appeared in the doorway, returning from her patrol, and immediately assessed the situation with the tactical precision of someone who'd been a soldier in another life. "The bathroom window," she said to Eleanor. "He'll go through the bathroom window while we're blocking the door." She was right, and they all knew it. Beau could see resignation settling over Eleanor's features, the acceptance that they couldn't physically restrain him without hurting him, couldn't lock him in the room without betraying Edith's trust, couldn't choose his mother's life over his own when he'd already made that choice himself. Eleanor stepped aside slowly, her golden eyes shining with unshed venom tears that vampires couldn't actually cry. "At least let me call Edith," she said. "Let her know what's happening so she can get there faster." Beau nodded, already moving past her into the hallway, toward the elevator that would take him to the lobby, to a taxi, to the ballet studio where Joss waited with patient hunger. He heard Eleanor's voice behind him, urgent and pleading as she spoke into her phone. But the elevator doors closed and cut off the sound, leaving Beau alone with his decision and the certain knowledge that he was driving toward his own death. The taxi driver was cheerful and talkative, commenting on the unusual storm clouds gathering over the city, asking if Bo had lived in Phoenix long, making small talk that Bo responded to automatically, while his mind churned through memories of his mother. Renee laughing at her own jokes, dancing in the kitchen to music only she could hear, squeezing his hand during scary movies, telling him she loved him before he left for Forks. If he died today, at least he died saving her. At least his last act would be something heroic, rather than simply being a victim of circumstances beyond his control. The ballet studio appeared exactly as Bo remembered from his brief lessons as a child. A low concrete building with mirrored walls and hardwood floors visible through large windows. The parking lot was empty except for one car Bo didn't recognize, and the building itself looked abandoned despite being early afternoon. He paid the taxi driver with money he'd grabbed from the hotel room, waited until the cab disappeared around the corner, and walked toward the entrance with the calm of someone who'd accepted the inevitable. The door was unlocked. It swung open silently, revealing the large practice space where Bo had stumbled through elementary ballet positions under the patient instruction of teachers whose names he'd long forgotten. The mirrors lining the walls reflected his image back at infinite angles, showing a tall, lanky boy who looked far too young to be making life or death decisions. The overhead lights were off, but the storm-dimmed daylight filtering through the windows provided enough illumination to see clearly. "Hello, Bo." Joss's voice came from the shadows near the back of the studio, musical and pleasant, as if they were meeting for coffee rather than a murder. "I'm so glad you could make it. I was worried those Cullens might convince you to stay away." She stepped into the light, and Bo saw that she held a video camera, its red recording light blinking steadily. Her crimson eyes glowed with anticipation, and her smile showed too many teeth, the expression of a predator who'd successfully lured prey exactly where she wanted them. Behind her, a television screen showed a paused image of Renee, and Bo understood with sinking certainty that his mother had never been here, that Joss had used old video footage to create the perfect trap. "She's not here," Bo said, the words emerging flat and emotionless. "You used a recording." "Very perceptive," Joss said, circling him slowly, with the camera raised, filming from multiple angles. "Your mother is safe in Jacksonville with her husband, completely unaware that her son is about to die in a place she probably doesn't even remember bringing him to. It's poetic, really. The location where you learn to dance becoming the location where you die." "Why are you filming?" Bo asked, though he already suspected the answer. "For Edith," Joss said, her smile widening. "So she can watch exactly how I killed you, can see every moment of your death, can understand that she failed to protect what she loved. The Cullens think they're so superior with their vegetarian lifestyle and their pretense of humanity. I want to show them what they really are. Monsters who couldn't save one fragile human from another monster." She moved then, faster than Bo's eyes could track, and suddenly she was behind him, her marble-hard hand gripping his shoulder with pressure that made his bones creak. "Let's begin," she whispered in his ear, and then she threw him across the studio like he weighed nothing at all. Bo's body hit the mirrors with shattering force, glass exploding around him, shards embedding in his skin. As he crashed to the hardwood floor, pain exploded through his left leg, the bones snapping with a sound that echoed in the empty studio. He tried to crawl away, his hands slipping in blood that he distantly recognized as his own. But Joss was already there, lifting him by his shirt and examining him with clinical interest. "You smell even better up close," she said conversationally. "I can understand why Editha was tempted. Such rich blood, such appealing scent. It's almost a shame I have to waste it on making a point." She threw him again, and this time, Beau's head cracked against one of the support beams, stars exploding across his vision. Consciousness fragmenting into pieces that didn't quite connect. He was aware of lying on the floor, aware of Joss standing over him with the camera still recording, aware that his body was broken in multiple places, and that death was approaching with the inevitability of sunset. Then Joss's mouth was on his wrist, her teeth sinking into flesh with exquisite precision, and fire erupted in his veins. The venom spread from the bite mark with terrifying speed, burning through his circulatory system like acid, transforming blood into molten agony. Beau screamed, the sound tearing from his throat with primal intensity, every cell in his body suddenly aware and in exquisite pain. Through the fog of agony, Beau heard doors exploding inward, heard snarling that sounded like wild animals fighting, heard Joss's surprised curse as she was torn away from him. Cold hands touched his face, his wrist, and Edith's voice cut through the pain, like a lifeline thrown to someone drowning. "Beau, stay with me," she said urgently, and he felt her mouth on his wrist where Joss had bitten, felt her sucking the venom out with desperate intensity. "Please stay with me. Don't leave. I love you. Please don't leave." The fire in his veins fought against her efforts, spreading deeper with every heartbeat. But Edith drank with relentless determination, pulling the venom back, extracting it before it could complete the transformation. Beau's consciousness flickered between present and absent, between pain and numbness, between the studio and some dark place where nothing hurt anymore. "Edith, that's enough." Archie's voice from somewhere far away. "You've got it all. You have to stop now, or you'll drain him completely." Beau felt Edith's mouth leave his wrist, felt her cold tears falling on his face as she cradled him against her chest. Around them, the other Cullens were destroying Joss, tearing her apart and burning the pieces, eliminating the threat she'd represented. But Beau's attention was fading, his body shutting down from trauma and blood loss, darkness closing in with gentle insistence. "I'm sorry," he whispered, the words barely audible. "I had to save her. I had to save Mom." "I know," Eddie said, her voice breaking with anguish. "I know, love. You're so brave and so stupid, and I love you so much. Stay with me. Please stay with me." Beau tried to respond, tried to tell her he loved her too, tried to promise he'd stay, but the darkness was too strong, too insistent, and his last conscious thought was gratitude that at least his mother was safe, at least his death had meaning, at least he'd loved someone truly before the end. Then the darkness claimed him completely, and he knew nothing more. Consciousness returned in fragments, awareness assembling itself from scattered pieces that didn't quite fit together into coherent understanding. Beau became aware first of pain, a throbbing ache that radiated from multiple points across his body with rhythmic insistence. Then sound, the steady beep of medical equipment, the whisper of air conditioning, distant voices speaking in hushed tones. Then touch, something cold gripping his right hand with careful pressure. And finally the chemical smell of antiseptic and cleaning solutions that identified his location as a hospital before he even opened his eyes. The light was too bright when he finally managed to lift his eyelids, forcing him to squint against the fluorescent glare until his vision adjusted enough to make sense of his surroundings. White walls, white ceiling, white sheets covering his body, and beside the bed, a figure whose pale perfection seemed to glow against all that clinical sterility. Edith sat in the visitor's chair with her golden eyes fixed on his face, her cold hand wrapped around his with a gentleness that contradicted the desperate intensity of her expression. "You're awake," she said, her musical voice rough with emotion. Bo had never heard from her before. "You're awake and alive and still yourself. Thank God, thank God, thank God." Bo tried to speak, but his throat was too dry, his voice emerging as a croak that barely qualified as sound. Edith immediately reached for the water cup on the bedside table, holding the straw to his lips with steady hands, while he drank in small sips that soothed the rawness. When he could finally speak, the first word that emerged was a question that had been forming in his semi-conscious mind. "Mom." "Safe," Edith said immediately. "She's in Jacksonville with Phil, completely unaware anything happened. Joss never went near her. It was all a trap using old video footage. Your mother doesn't even know you were in Phoenix." Relief flooded through Bo with intensity that made his eyes burn with tears he was too dehydrated to actually produce. His sacrifice hadn't been necessary after all. His dramatic gesture to save his mother meaningless because she'd never been in danger. The irony would have been funny if it didn't make his entire ordeal feel so pointless. His near death reduced to the result of falling for a predator's manipulation. "How long have I been here?" Bo asked, his voice still rough despite the water. 3 days, Edith said, and he could see the strain of those 72 hours written in the tightness around her eyes. The rigid way she held herself as if maintaining control required constant effort. You had a broken leg, 3 cracked ribs, a severe concussion, and you'd lost enough blood that they had to give you transfusions. The doctors weren't sure you'd wake up. I wasn't sure you'd wake up. Bo looked down at his body, seeing his left leg elevated in a cast, feeling the tight binding around his chest that suggested bandages protecting cracked ribs. His head throbbed with each heartbeat, and when he tried to shift position, pain lanced through him with enough intensity to make him gasp. He was comprehensively broken, his body a catalogue of injuries that would take weeks or months to heal properly. The cover story, Edith continued, her tone becoming almost clinical as she recited the lie they'd constructed, is that you fell down 2 flights of stairs in the ballet studio and through a window. You were visiting Phoenix, decided to look at the old studio where you took lessons as a child, and you tripped on the stairs. The glass from the window caused most of your cuts, and the fall caused the broken bones and head trauma. Does anyone believe that? Bo asked skeptically. Your mother does because she wants to, Edith said. She feels guilty that you were in Phoenix at all, thinks you came back because you missed Arizona, and she should have known you were struggling in Forks. Charlie believes it because the alternative is too complicated, and he trusts the police report. The doctors don't really care as long as you survive, and they can treat your injuries. The door opened before Bo could respond, admitting a vampire he recognized despite only meeting her briefly. Dr. Corrine Cullen entered with the professional demeanor of someone who'd practiced medicine for centuries. Her white coat and stethoscope making her look every inch the respected physician she pretended to be. Her golden eyes assessed Beau with a kind of comprehensive evaluation that saw past surfaces to the actual condition of his body. "Beau," she said warmly, approaching the bed with a gentle smile. "It's good to see you awake. You gave us quite a scare. How are you feeling?" "Like I fell down 2 flights of stairs and through a window," Beau said, attempting humor despite the pain. Kareen's smile widened slightly. "That's actually an accurate description. You have significant injuries, but nothing that won't heal with time and proper care. The leg will take 6 to 8 weeks in the cast. The ribs will hurt for at least a month. The concussion is the biggest concern, but your scans show no permanent damage. You'll make a full recovery." She performed a quick examination, checking his pupils, testing his reflexes, asking questions about his pain levels and any numbness or tingling he might be experiencing. Her hands were cold, like all vampire hands, but her touch was professional and careful, and Beau found himself trusting her completely, despite knowing what she was. When she finished, she made notes on his chart with handwriting that was probably too perfect to be believably human. "Your mother is on her way," Kareen said as she prepared to leave. "She should arrive sometime this evening. Charlie's been here every day, but he's at work right now. I'll call him and let him know you're awake." After Kareen left, Beau and Edith sat in silence for several minutes, her cold hand still gripping his, their connection maintained despite everything that had happened. Finally, Beau gathered courage to ask the question that had been building in his mind since he'd understood where he was and what had happened. "Joss, dead," Edith said flatly. "Royal and Ernest tore her apart while I was removing the venom from your system. We burned the pieces. She's gone completely. No possibility of resurrection or revenge. The threat is eliminated." "I'm sorry," Beau said, and Edith's head snapped up, her golden eyes wide with disbelief. "You're sorry? Beau, you have nothing to apologize for. I'm the one who brought you into this world. I'm the one whose nature attracted a tracker. I'm the one who failed to protect you. You saved me," Beau countered. "You got there in time. You removed the venom before it could complete the transformation. If anyone failed, it was me for falling for Joss's trap." "You thought your mother was in danger," Edith said fiercely. "You were willing to die to save her. That's not failure, Beau. That's heroism. Even if it was misguided heroism based on false information." They argued quietly about responsibility and fault, each trying to claim the blame, each trying to absolve the other. But eventually, the argument faded into exhausted acceptance that what had happened couldn't be changed, that blame was less important than the fact that Beau had survived, that they were together, that the danger had passed. Charlie arrived an hour later, his face showing the strain of 3 days, watching his son lie unconscious in a hospital bed. He hugged Beau carefully, mindful of the injuries, and his voice was rough when he spoke about how worried he'd been, how scared, how grateful that Beau was going to be okay. The fight they'd staged before Beau left Forks hung between them unspoken, both understanding it had been theatre, but neither quite knowing how to address it. "I'm sorry for what I said," Beau offered. "Before I left, I didn't mean any of it." "I know," Charlie said simply. "We'll talk about it later, when you're feeling better. Right now, I'm just glad you're alive." Renee arrived that evening, in a flurry of tears and apologies and maternal guilt, convinced that Beau's accident was somehow her fault for not recognizing his unhappiness in Forks. Beau assured her repeatedly that he'd been fine, that his visit to Phoenix had been spontaneous, that the accident was just that, an accident, nothing more meaningful or preventable. She stayed for 2 days, fussing over him constantly, until Phil called needing her in Jacksonville, and she left with promises to visit again soon and demands that he call her every day. The hospital days blurred together in a haze of pain medication and physical therapy, and visits from people expressing concern. Jeremy and Michaela and Alan came once, bringing flowers and awkward conversation, clearly uncomfortable with the reality of serious injury. The Cullens visited frequently, always careful to maintain their human facade while in public, but their golden eyes showed genuine concern that transcended their supernatural nature. Edith never left for more than an hour at a time, maintaining vigil beside his bed with the dedication of someone who'd almost lost everything and refused to risk it again. They talked about everything and nothing, filling the hours with a conversation that ranged from trivial to profound. But they didn't discuss transformation, didn't address the fundamental question of Beau's mortality versus Edith's immortality, didn't examine the future that remained uncertain and complicated. After a week, the doctors cleared Beau for discharge with strict instructions about rest and physical therapy and follow-up appointments. Charlie drove him back to Forks in careful silence, the truck moving slowly over roads that felt different somehow, as if Beau's near death had changed his perspective on everything familiar. The house looked smaller than he remembered, more ordinary, a place that belonged to his old life before vampires and danger and love that demanded everything. Recovery was slow and frustrating, his broken body healing at the irritatingly human pace that made him acutely aware of his fragility compared to Edith's marble hard perfection. She helped him with physical therapy, supporting him as he learned to walk with crutches, carrying him upstairs when his strength failed, reading to him during long afternoons when pain made concentration impossible. Her presence was constant, comforting, and Beau understood that she blamed herself for his injuries, despite his repeated insistence that the fault lay with Joss, not with loving someone dangerous. 6 weeks after the attack, as spring transformed into early summer, and the perpetual rain gave way to occasional sunshine, the cast came off Beau's leg, and he took his first unassisted steps. The leg was weak, the muscles atrophied from disuse, but it held his weight and responded to his commands. He was healing, slowly returning to the person he'd been before the ballet studio, though some fundamental part of him had changed in ways he couldn't quite articulate. Edith watched him walk across the living room with an expression that combined pride and sorrow, happiness at his recovery mixed with awareness of how close she'd come to losing him. And in her golden eyes, Beau saw the decision she'd made, the conclusion she'd reached during the weeks of watching him heal with agonizing slowness. "I should leave," she said quietly. "I should take my family and move away from Forks. Let you live a normal human life without vampires endangering you." "No," Beau said immediately, the word emerging with absolute certainty. "You're not leaving me. We've been through too much for you to use this as an excuse to run away." "I almost got you killed," Edith said, her voice breaking. "If I'd been 1 minute slower getting to that studio, if Archie's vision had been less clear, if I hadn't been able to remove all the venom, you'd be dead or transformed against your will. How can I risk that happening again? Because I love you, Bo said simply. Because walking away doesn't eliminate the risk, it just makes us both miserable while accomplishing nothing. Because I choose you, Edith, danger and all. I choose this life over a safe, normal existence without you in it. They stood facing each other in Charlie's living room. Human and vampire, mortal and immortal, separated by fundamental differences, but connected by something stronger than logic or self-preservation. And slowly, reluctantly, Edith nodded, accepting his choice even as she continued to believe it was the wrong one. Then I'm staying, she said, but you have to promise me something. Promise you'll be more careful. Promise you won't sacrifice yourself to save others. Promise you'll let me protect you. I promise to try, Bo said, which was the most honest answer he could give. But I can't promise to let people die to save myself. That's not who I am. I know, Edith said, and she smiled despite the fear still visible in her eyes. That's why I love you. But please, Bo, please don't make me watch you die again. I couldn't survive it a second time. He pulled her into an embrace, her cold body against his warm one, and they stood together while the afternoon sun streamed through the windows, illuminating the space where they'd chosen each other despite every logical reason not to. The future remained uncertain, the questions about transformation and mortality still unanswered. But for now, in this moment, they had each other, and that was enough. The prom invitation arrived with Editha's insistence rather than Bo's enthusiasm, her determination to give him normal human experiences before the inevitable decision about transformation had to be made. Bo protested with all the arguments he could muster, explaining that school dances represented everything he found uncomfortable about human social rituals, that his coordination had barely recovered enough for walking, let alone dancing, that the entire concept of prom felt frivolous compared to the life and death struggles they'd recently survived. But Edith was adamant with a gentle stubbornness that made arguing with her simultaneously frustrating and endearing. She wanted to take him to prom, wanted to dress up and dance and pretend for one evening that they were normal teenagers doing normal teenage things. She wanted to give him this memory, this experience that he could carry into whatever future they built together, whether that future was measured in decades of mortality or centuries of immortal existence. So Bo found himself in a rented tuxedo on a Saturday evening in late May, standing in Charlie's living room while his father took photographs with embarrassing parental enthusiasm. The tuxedo felt foreign on his body, too formal and restrictive, the bow tie strangling him slowly as the minutes ticked toward Edith's promised arrival. Charlie offered advice about being a gentleman, about treating his date with respect, about not staying out too late. All the things fathers said to sons before proms, even when the father suspected his son's date was something far more dangerous than a typical teenage girl. Editha arrived precisely on time, emerging from the silver Volvo in a dress that made Bo's breath catch despite his general disinterest in formal wear. The gown was vintage, probably from the 1920s, based on its style, deep blue silk that complemented her pale skin and moved with liquid grace as she walked. Her hair was styled in elegant waves that framed her perfect features, and her golden eyes held amusement at Beau's obvious stunned reaction. "You look beautiful," Beau managed, the words inadequate but sincere. "You look uncomfortable," Edith countered, her smile widening, "but handsome nonetheless. Shall we go before you find another excuse to avoid this?" The drive to the school was short, the parking lot already crowded with vehicles as students arrived for the dance. The gymnasium had been transformed with decorations that showed Alice-level attention to detail, though Beau suspected the resemblance was coincidental rather than influenced by prescient vampires. Streamers and lights and a mirrored ball that cast spinning reflections across the walls. All the traditional elements of a high school dance arranged with as much elegance as the limited budget allowed. Inside, students clustered in groups according to their established social circles, everyone dressed in their finest, everyone participating in the ritual of prom with varying degrees of enthusiasm. Heads turned as Edith and Beau entered together, whispers spreading through the crowd at the sight of the mysterious Cullen girl with the police chief's son. Speculation that had been building all semester reaching its peak at this public declaration of their relationship. Michaela watched from across the room with barely concealed disappointment, her date looking confused by her obvious attention to Beau rather than him. Jeremy waved with his characteristic friendliness, apparently bearing no grudge about Beau's absorption into the Cullen orbit. The other students stared with curiosity that bordered on rudeness, unable to comprehend how the new kid had managed to breach the impenetrable social fortress the Cullens had maintained. "Ignore them," Edith whispered, her cold hand slipping into his. "Tonight is about us, not their opinions." They moved to the dance floor as the music shifted to something slow, and Edith guided Beau into a basic waltz position with the patience of someone who'd been dancing for a century. Her marble-hard arms wrapped around him with carefully controlled strength, her cold body pressed against his warm one, and they began to move with a grace that came entirely from her supernatural coordination rather than his clumsy human efforts. "I'm going to step on your feet," Beau warned, already feeling his coordination failing under the pressure of public performance. "You can't hurt me," Edith reminded him gently. "Step on my feet as much as you need to. I won't feel it, and no one will notice because I'll make us look graceful regardless." She was right. Despite Beau's awkwardness, despite his tendency to stumble, and his complete lack of rhythm, Edith moved them across the floor with effortless elegance that made other couples stop to watch. She led without making it obvious, anticipating his missteps and adjusting her movements to compensate, transforming his clumsiness into something that resembled actual dancing through sheer force of her supernatural ability. The song ended and another began, and they remained on the dance floor through 3 more slow numbers, while Beau gradually relaxed into the motion, trusting Edith to prevent any catastrophic falls. Around them, other students danced and laughed and took photographs, capturing memories of this night that would fade with time for them, but remain crystal clear in Edith's perfect vampire memory. Eventually, they retreated outside to the gazebo that had been erected in the school courtyard, leaving behind the noise and heat and crush of the gymnasium for the cool evening air and the privacy of shadows. Fairy lights hung from the gazebo's roof, casting gentle illumination that made Edith's skin glow with its characteristic vampire luminescence. She looked impossibly beautiful standing there, ancient and young simultaneously, human and inhuman. Everything Bo wanted, and everything he couldn't quite have. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for insisting on this, for giving me prom despite my protests." "You're welcome," Edith said, moving closer until only inches separated them. "I wanted you to have this. Wanted us to have this memory of being normal teenagers, doing normal things, even if it's temporary pretense." The conversation they'd been avoiding for weeks finally emerged, pulled into the open by the intimacy of the moment and the understanding that avoidance had never been a sustainable strategy. Transformation, mortality, the fundamental question of whether Bo would remain human until death separated them or become vampire to stay with Edith forever. "I want you to change me," Bo said, voicing the desire that had been growing stronger with every passing day. "I want forever with you, not just a few decades my human lifespan allows." "I want you to live," Edith countered, her expression pained. "To experience all the things vampires lose, sleep and dreams and the ability to change and grow. I don't want to steal that from you." "You're not stealing anything I value," Bo argued. "What's the point of sleeping and dreaming if I have to do it without you? What's the point of changing and growing if it means growing old while you stay frozen? I've thought about this constantly, Edith. This is what I want." They'd had this argument before in various forms, each presenting their perspective with passionate conviction, neither able to fully convince the other. Edith saw transformation as damnation, the loss of humanity and soul, and everything that made human life meaningful. Bo saw it as necessary evolution, the only path to a future where they could truly be together without the constant awareness of his mortality hanging over them. "I'm too selfish to leave you," Edith admitted finally. "Too weak to walk away even though I know I should. But I can't transform you, Bo. I can't be the one who steals your humanity. If you want forever, you'll have to convince someone else in my family to change you, because I won't do it." It was an agreement, but it was acknowledgement that the question would eventually demand resolution. Bo accepted this partial victory, understanding that pushing further tonight would only create conflict that would ruin the peace they'd built. There would be time for continued discussion, time for convincing Edith or finding alternative paths to the immortality he desired. The music from the gymnasium drifted through the open doors, and Edith pulled Bo back into a dance position beneath the fairy lights, moving with him in slow circles that required no particular skill. Above them, stars appeared as clouds cleared, the rare Washington night sky revealing its depths. Edith tilted her head back, looking upward with expression that suggested longing for something she'd lost. "I miss dreaming," she said quietly. "Miss the ability to escape into unconsciousness and experience things that don't follow waking logic. That's what I'd warn you about if you were actually listening to my concerns. Vampires never rest. We never get that break from consciousness, that reset that sleep provides. We're always aware, always thinking, always present in every moment. Then I'll dream enough for both of us while I'm still human," Bo said. "And when I'm vampire, we'll find other ways to escape." "You're stubborn," Edith said, but she smiled as she said it. "I learned from the best," Bo countered, and she laughed, a sound like music in the quiet evening. They stayed outside until the dance ended, until other students began emerging from the gymnasium, heading toward their cars and after parties. Charlie would be expecting Beau home at a reasonable hour, and Edith drove him back through streets that had become familiar over the months since his arrival in Forks. The town that had seemed so foreign and unwelcoming had transformed into home, not because of the place itself, but because of the people, because of Edith and her family and the supernatural world they'd welcomed him into. At the house, Edith walked Beau to the door with old-fashioned courtesy that reflected her 1901 upbringing. She kissed him goodnight, her cold lips gentle against his, and her golden eyes held promises of forever, even though forever's exact nature remained undecided. "I love you, Beau Swan," she whispered against his mouth. "Forever?" he asked, the question containing multitudes. "Forever," she agreed, and they both understood that forever meant different things to each of them, but they were choosing it anyway, choosing each other despite the complications and impossibilities and uncertainties. And so, dreamy travelers, we leave Beau and Edith here, standing on the threshold between human and immortal, between temporary and eternal, between the life that was and the life that might be. Their story continues beyond this moment, but the foundation has been laid. Love that transcends species, courage that faces danger without flinching, the willingness to sacrifice everything for connection that defies every logical objection. In this mirror world, where roles reversed but hearts remain constant, where Beau found extraordinary love in the most ordinary of places, where a vampire named Edith chose to love rather than hunt, we find the same truth that echoes through all love stories, regardless of the faces they wear. That love demands courage, that connection requires sacrifice, that sometimes the most dangerous choice is also the most necessary one. Close your eyes now and rest in the knowledge that love endures in all its forms, that courage lives in quiet choices made daily, that the space between heartbeats holds infinite possibility. Let sleep embrace you, where forever is a promise worth keeping, where danger and beauty intertwine, where every ending is simply a beginning waiting to unfold. Sleep well, and know that love transcends all boundaries, crosses all divides, survives all obstacles. The story continues in dreams, where anything is possible and everything is permitted, where mortal and immortal dance together beneath stars that shine for all who dare to look upward. Rest now, dreamy travelers. Rest and dream of love that never fades, courage that never wavers, and futures bright with possibility. The gentle darkness embraces you. Tomorrow awaits with all its mysteries, but tonight there's only peace, only rest, only the soft knowledge that love, in the end, is always enough. Sleep well and know that love endures. And so, dreamy travelers, we leave Beau and Edith here, standing on the threshold between human and immortal, between temporary and eternal, their story continuing beyond this moment into futures unwritten. In this mirror world, where roles reversed but hearts remain constant, we find the same eternal truth. Love demands courage, connection requires sacrifice, and sometimes the most dangerous choice is also the right one. Close your eyes now and rest, knowing that love transcends all boundaries, that courage lives in quiet daily choices, and that the space between heartbeats holds infinite possibility. Sleep well, dreamy travelers, and know that love endures, always and forever, across all worlds and through all transformations.